You have been giving the Straw Hats devil fruits completely wrong, which is kind of impressive, because some don't even have devil fruits, and we still manage to fumble it. The dominant fan meta is basically, what if we just slapped Goku DLC on everyone? Zoro gets a cutting fruit. Sanji gets more fire. Nami gets Enel's Goro Goro, because thunder boobies. Usopp gets some vague sniper bullet fruit, and we call it a day. And to be fair, those are fun ideas on a power scaling spreadsheet, but they are completely un-Oda-like, because as far as Oda is concerned, a devil fruit is not a stat boost. It's a narrative contract. It's a curse that stapled itself to a person's dream, trauma and job on the ship. Luffy doesn't have Rubber Plus. He has the literal embodiment of a trickster liberation god welded to a guy, whose entire deal is laughing in the face of oppression. Law doesn't just get surgery hacks. He gets a fruit that forces him into the role of the man who cuts his own lifespan to rewrite fate. Robin's Hana is not extra arms. It's the power to be everywhere and nowhere at once, exactly like a hunted historian who survives by reading the world from the shadows. So when we say Zoro with a sword, fruit would be sick. Oda kind of looks at us spiritually and goes, really, you want to give the guy whose entire identity is earning his strength a cheat code? Sanji with a generic fire, Logia, when his whole character is literally building his own hellfire through passion. Nami with the sky god nuke fruit, when her real power is turning the world's weather system into a weapon. Usopp with a perfect aim fruit, when his core fantasy is becoming a brave warrior, despite being a mess of fear. That's not bad, it just misses the point of how this story hands out powers. Here's an interesting thing. Oda matches fruits to people on 3 axes at once: personality, archetype, dream, or ideal. And the very specific hole they fill in the story's ecosystem crew, role, world-building niche, and thematic symbol. The fruit is an answer to a question the narrative is already asking, and I want to emphasize it usually creates a new problem at the same time. So what are we actually doing in this video? We're going to give every Straw Hat a perfect devil fruit that Oda could plausibly have written. We're digging into obscure fruits, databook crumbs, weird cover story powers, and those conceptual paramecia that embody ideas like toy sphere or stories. Then we'll lightly rewrite major arcs, Aeneas Lobby, Marineford, Wano, and ask, okay, if this version of Nami or Usopp existed, how does the balance of the world shift without turning the crew into a walking mythical Zoan, convention ground rules, no redundant abilities on the same ship, no fruits that only solve problems? They have to echo a core emotional beat and ideally make that character's life harder in a very specific way. Some of these picks are going to sound wrong at first glance, like, why would you ever give that fruit to that Straw Hat? To which I say, give it 10 minutes of Oda-style pairing logic, and it will start to feel uncomfortably inevitable. And the blueprint for all of this is actually Luffy's own fruit, because the Nika model looks like pure chaos. But it is secretly the cleanest expression of how Oda thinks about power. So before we touch Zoro, Sanji, or anyone else, we have to break down why the Sun God fits the dumb rubber boy a little too well, how Oda actually chooses devil fruits, the Nika Law Robin blueprint. So the Nika fruit is where a lot of people just throw up their hands and go, okay Oda, you retconned rubber into a god, sure man. To which I say, yes he did, but also no, because as far as Oda's power logic goes, this is actually the cleanest, least random choice he's ever made. Here's an interesting thing about Nika. On paper, it's not strong because numbers go up. It's strong because rules go away. It is literally a narrative permission slip. Luffy's body becomes as free as his imagination. Cartoon physics, sound effects as weapons, the ground turning into a bouncy castle. That's not just gag power. That is his worldview weaponized. He wants a world without imposed limits, and his fruit says, cool, the laws of reality are optional now. I want to emphasize that the sun god part just formalizes what he already was, the joy bringer whose stupid laugh infects entire islands. Contrast that with law. OP is the opposite kind of system, hyper-technical, fussy. It draws circles, charges fees, makes you read the terms and conditions before you cut a guy's heart out. A traumatized child who watched his country die gets the surgery fruit that literalizes control, choice, and sacrifice. He can rearrange bodies, swap personalities, steal years off his own life. Of course, the guy obsessed with beating fate is given a power that whispers, if you pay enough, you can rewrite anything. And, to be fair, Oda doesn't hide the cost. The ultimate surgery is a built-in death flag that mirrors Law's willingness to die for his revenge and his allies. Then we have Robin, who looks comparatively simple, but is probably the most evil little design joke Oda's ever made. A girl whose childhood is shattered across burned libraries and buster-cooled trauma gets the Hana Hana no Mi, a fruit about dismembered pieces of yourself sprouting everywhere. Extra eyes, extra ears, extra hands in the dark. She is literally a fragmented person who survives by being everywhere and nowhere, the crew's many hands in the shadows. Her dream is to assemble a history that the world government tried to scatter, and her body enacts that every time she blooms a field of limbs across a battlefield. So what's the pattern? These fruits aren't random power-ups. They externalize an internal contradiction. Luffy is a goofy god. Law is a healer executioner. Robin wants connection, but fears being seen. The fruit takes that mess, cranks it to 11, and then engineers situations where they have to grow through it. Our working formula is this. Ideal fruit equals dream plus trauma plus role times world-building need. If a major character's fruit doesn't tick all 4 boxes, Oda probably parks it on a side villain or a gag, and he loves picking fruits that sound underwhelming at first. Rubber, flower limbs, even room-making surgeon, and only revealing how broken they are after the character has bled for it. We're going to run that exact formula on every Straw Hat, and here's the fun part. Some of the best matches come from obscure or even non-canon fruits that Oda quietly dumped into side materials. To which I say, that's basically an invitation. So let's start stress testing this blueprint with the swordsman who was one bad lunch away from eating the Gomu Gomu himself, Zoro. The rules of the game, limits, bans, and Oda-style constraints. But before we start handing out god-tier fruits like Oprah with a mythological budget, we need rules. Because if we don't put some Oda-style constraints on this, you end up with the Straw Hats as 12 flying, teleporting, time-stopping Logia demigods. And at that point, the series is just Dragon Ball with boats. Rule 1. No cheating with duplicates. No second core abilities on the same crew. If Sanji exists as walking Diable Jambe, we're not giving anyone a Mera Mera knockoff. Luffy is already the reality-warping sun god of cartoon freedom. We are not sneaking in a second Nika under a different brand name. Oda actually hates intra-team redundancy. You don't see a second swordsman, a second sniper, or a second I punch really hard with rubber guy, because as far as team design goes, he wants each Straw Hat to occupy a unique combat and symbolic lane. Here's an interesting thing. That ties into Rule 2, which is role reinforcement over raw power. The fruit has to make their job and their narrative function pop first, and only then buff their 1 versus 1. So Nami doesn't just need big lightning go boom. She needs something that turns her into the ultimate navigator and weather tactician. Chopper's perfect fruit should scream doctor and medical ethics nightmare before it screams monster point go bro. If a fruit makes them stronger but doesn't deepen their dream, it's off the table. Cool, but wrong series. Rule 3 is about scope. We're pulling from canon manga fruits, SBS, and Vivre card confirmed abilities, cover story fruits, and a couple of very Oda-esque non-canon fruits. Anytime we dip into a game or movie original, we'll flag it, because I want to emphasize we're not just inventing fanfic powers. We're mining the existing mess of devil fruit ideas that Oda and his editors have already thrown into the ecosystem and then forgotten about. Now every power needs a price tag. So Rule 4, every Straw Hat's perfect fruit comes with at least one serious drawback or complication. Mobility issues, moral dilemmas, the world government suddenly putting them on the absolutely do not let this person live list. Something. Power without narrative friction is boring, and to be fair, Oda has never given a top-tier fruit without attaching some horrifying surgery, lifespan cost, or social consequence. Law's Ope, Sugar's child slavery button, Robin's isolation, it's all baked in. Rule 5. Timeline. We're imagining an alternate world where each Straw Hat had their fruit from roughly their recruitment arc. That means we'll occasionally stop and say, okay, what does Alabaster look like if Usopp already has his ideal fruit? How cursed does Eni's lobby become with a different Robin? Does Marineford get even worse if Chopper's medical hacks was already broken? We'll fast forward this system through key sagas and watch the world bend around it. Also, we are not touching Luffy. Rule 6. Gomu Gomu/Nika is the anchor of the story and the crew. Everyone else's fruit has to coexist with that spotlight, without stealing his thematic lane of freedom, joy, and reality as a Looney Tune. No second rubber god, no rival liberation deity, no fruit that turns someone into a more efficient symbol of hope than the actual main character. You can be wild, but you can't out-joy boy. And with all of that locked in, Rule 7 is less a rule and more a threat. The first straw hat we're going to refruit isn't the swordsman or the cook or even the captain. It's the one whose dream is so abstract and world-shaking that giving them their perfect fruit basically hands them a quiet apocalypse. You probably already know who that is, but when you see the fruit, you're going to wish Oda never thought of it. Dreams, trauma, and crew roles. The 4 axes of a perfect fruit. So before we start handing out apocalyptic fruits like Oprah with forbidden gum coupons, we need an actual framework. Perfect devil fruit sounds cool and vague and very YouTube, but what does that even mean in story? For this video, we're going to lock it into 4 axes that Oda quietly uses all the time, even if he's never sat down and written the PowerPoint. Axis 1 is dream. Every straw hat has a slogan dream, but the important part is the hidden verb inside it. Sanji doesn't just want all blue. He wants to connect every sea. Nami doesn't just want a world map. She wants to reveal and control what the world really looks like. Chopper's cure every disease is literally heal all wounds, physical and emotional. A perfect fruit doesn't just help with that. It literalizes the metaphor. Suddenly, connecting all seas becomes a spatial fruit or a current bending power, not just Sanji, but with Fire 2.0. I want to emphasize, we're not power scaling. We're translating dreams into mechanics. Axis 2 is trauma, because as far as Oda is concerned, backstory is basically a shopping list for powers. Someone who was powerless against nature? You give them dominion over it. Someone who was isolated and treated like a monster? You hand them a connection fruit that forces people to share senses or emotions or memories. That's why a kid whose entire island was wiped out by knowledge gets the power to literally grow more hands, to reach into forbidden history. Is it subtle? Not really. Is it narratively cathartic? Extremely. Axis 3 is crew role. Oda writes the Straw Hats like an RPG party where everyone has a job, and the job comes first. The ideal fruit should make their existing role more insane, not replace it with generic beam spam. Navigator fruits should break the weather system. Doctor fruits should bully biology. Musician fruits should weaponize sound. If the perfect fruit turns Usopp into just another mid-range brawler, that's not perfect. That's you accidentally deleting one of the best support classes in Shonen. Axis 4 is world-building need. Here's an interesting thing. Some fruits in One Piece exist less for the user and more for the setting. The Ope Ope no Mi answers, how do you do impossible surgery and spatial nonsense? Sugar's fruit answers, how do you rewrite social reality with one touch? Kizaru's Pika Pika no Mi is basically the speed of light FAQ. When you give a straw hat that kind of fruit, you're not just buffing them, you're quietly rewriting how the Grand Line works. Weather control, memory editing, moving islands, rewriting history, these are Axis 4 levers. And to be fair, this isn't us galaxy braining patterns out of nothing. Look at Smoker, Dream, enforce his version of justice. Trauma, watching corruption from the inside. Role, Marine Hunter of Pirates, world-building need. Show how Logias dominate the early Grand Line. His smoke fruit lets him be everywhere, slip through systems, and still not quite catch the man made of rubber. Kizaru? Same thing, but cranked to Admiral and plugged directly into the what if a man really moved at light speed? Question. So for each straw hat, we're going to walk these 4 axes. Dream, trauma, crew role, world-building need. And only then drop the fruit pick. So you can argue with the logic instead of just screaming skill issue in the comments. And the first test case is the one whose dream is literally to resurrect a murdered century of history. Axis 4 is about to start screaming, because Oda basically handed this character a backstage pass to the setting's biggest taboo. If we give her the fruit she actually should have had, the entire balance of the world government, the Yonko, and even Imu stops making sense in a very fun, very terrifying way. Why we're not just handing out mythical zones like candy. So, Before we start reallocating god-tier powers like we're running a Blackbeard HR department, we need to talk about the elephant in the subreddit, the mythical zone shopping spree. You know the posts. Zoro should get a sword kami fruit, Sanji a fire demon, Nami a storm goddess, Usopp a trickster god. To which I say, congratulations, you have just accidentally speed-ran the process of making Luffy less special and the crew way more boring. Because as far as Oda's actual usage goes, mythical zones are not just fancy animal hats. Marco, Sengoku, Kaido, Yamato, Luffy, each of these is a walking religious event. The second they show up, the political gravity of the scene bends around them. Marineford literally stops to explain Marco's blue phoenix flames. Wano's entire cosmology is built around, hey, what if your abusive dad is also an unkillable dragon god? Luffy's fruit retcon doesn't just buff his punches, it rewires the series' central myth. If we hand every Straw Hat a personal deity, that symbolic economy collapses. Suddenly the Thousand Sunny is less a bunch of idiots with dreams, and more the Avengers, but everyone is Thor. And to be fair, that sounds cool for about 5 minutes, right up until you remember that the original charm of the crew is that they're mostly ordinary weirdos. A broke thief navigator, a cowardly liar, a reindeer doctor who can't get past his own self-hatred. People the world should ignore, forcing it to pay attention through willpower, not divine birthright. So we're putting in a mythical zone rule. They're allowed, but the bar is stupidly high. The myth has to mirror a Straw Hat's core wound and dream in a way a paramecia or regular zone literally can't. It has to say something about their relationship to the world, not just their damage output. And if we do cross that line, we actually have to live with the world-building fallout. If Nami becomes an actual storm goddess, what does that do to Big Mom's weather homies, to ancient weapons lore, to how the Navy categorizes natural disasters as military assets? Here's an interesting thing. Once you stop mythical spamming, the underused paramecia and logias start looking way more Oda-core. Fruits that seem goofy or niche, Perona's ghosts, Sugar's toys, the random cover story guy who turns things into art, become terrifying when you plug them into the right emotional arc. Oda loves conceptual paramecia that embody ideas like fear, stories, or luck. The power system is a metaphor machine first, combat tool second. So yes, we're also digging into cover stories and databooks, all the powers Oda tossed into the margins like someone else can figure out what this means. I want to emphasize that's basically a sandbox of unused narrative metaphors just sitting there, waiting for a Straw Hat whose trauma fits. And if you want to see how far that can go, our first refit is Robin. Because the fruit that actually matches her might make the world government's Ohara paranoia look kind of reasonable. Robin Reforged, from flower of knowledge to architect of history. So let's lay Robin on the operating table, metaphorically, because as far as actual surgery goes, we'd be dead in 5 seconds. Her whole character sits on 4 axes. The dream to uncover the true history, the trauma of Ohara's erasure and being branded a demon child, the role of archaeologist/spy/assassin, and the world-building need for a human interface to the Void Century itself. She's literally the series' save file. Here's an interesting thing. Hana already does a ton of thematic heavy lifting. Extra limbs sprouting everywhere? That's fragmented self 101. She can be present but not present, touching the world while her real body hides in the dark. It's survivor's guilt turned into a combat style. People say, Robin just needs a bigger, punchier fruit, to which I say, you're a bigger, punchier fruit. The core idea is already correct. We just escalate the stakes from I'm everywhere to history is everywhere. Oda loves literalizing abstract concepts with paramecia, so Robin's ideal fruit pretty much has to be some kind of inscription or memory paramecia. Not time travel, not reality overwrite, but a power that reads and manipulates the history embedded in matter. Think of it as the Memo no Mi's terrifying older sister, blended with poneglyph logic. Stones, soil, steel, even burned books all quietly remember what happened around them. Robin becomes the one person who can make that memory talk. And to be fair, the obvious fan pitch is history rewriting fruit. Just edit the past, fix Ohara, GG world government. That sounds cool for 5 seconds, and then you realize it turns One Piece into a bad time travel anime and nukes the central mystery. Oda does not do absolute control fruits without horrible catches. So instead, We cap it at projection, preservation, reconstruction. She can't change what happened, but she can force the world to watch it. Now plug that into her trauma. Imagine Robin walking through Ohara's ruins and, with a touch, resurrecting the final minutes as full-color, three-dimensional phantoms. She can hear Saul's laugh, see Clover's last stand, smell the burning books. It's a blessing because she can salvage data from annihilated sites and stitch together the Rio poneglyph out of environmental echoes. It's a curse because every investigation risks reopening the exact moment everything was taken from her. That instantly rewires key arcs. At Eni's lobby, when Spandam screams about demons of Ohara, Robin could literally flood the courthouse with the Buster Calls replay, broadcasting it through the Tower of Justice stone. The world government's sanitized narrative dies on camera. In Wano, she doesn't just read the poneglyph. She turns the flower capital's walls into a cinema of the ancient war, Kaido's tyranny visually rhyming with the void century in front of the entire country. History stops being text and becomes spectacle. And if Robin becomes the architect of visible history, then the next Straw Hat's ideal fruit can't be about memory at all. It has to answer a scarier question. What happens to the seas when that truth finally lands like a meteor? Nami and the forbidden weather gods, navigating power without breaking the map. And if truth is a meteor, then Nami is the poor soul, trying to predict its landing pattern, while the sky is actively gaslighting her. The Grand Line is supposed to be a weather horror game, and Oda hands that job to a girl with a stick, a tangerine tattoo, and unresolved ocean trauma. So, quick axis check. Nami's dream is stupidly pure. Draw a complete map of the world. Her trauma is not. Arlong weaponizes her cartography. The sea becomes this inescapable prison, and every storm is basically the universe saying, "You don't matter." Her role on the crew fuses all of that: navigator, tactician, and part-time climate engineer with the Climatact. And to be fair, from a world-building perspective, she's doing double duty as the human counterweight to the Grand Line's chaos. The world is a mess. She's the system trying to make it legible, which is why people go, "Just give her the Goro Goro no Mi, boom, weather solved." To which I say, you have missed the point so hard you've sailed into reverse mountain backwards. Goro Goro overlaps with Zeus, erases her tinkerer side, and turns her from scientist into natural disaster. Once Nami is NL 2.0, she's not reading the sky anymore, she's just deleting it. That's fun for 5 panels and then actually kind of boring, because as far as tension goes, the Grand Line's main villain is supposed to be unpredictability. Here's an interesting thing. Oda loves conceptual fruits. Sugar's hobby, Perona's horo, all these weird paramecia that embody an idea. So Nami's ideal isn't raw lightning. It's something like a mythical zone of a weather deity, or a special paramecia that gives dominion over atmospheric patterns, pressure, and currents in a tight radius. Not I control the climate, but I negotiate with the mood swings of the air directly around my ship. I want to emphasize how that would play with the Climatact, the fruit seeds phenomena, micro low pressure zones, humidity spikes, tiny jet streams. The staff is still the amplifier and scalpel. She nudges a pressure gradient. The Climatact turns it into a guided thunderhead. Brain first fighting stays intact because the fruit gives inputs, not auto-win outputs. It's still about reading charts, calculating vectors, and then poking the sky in exactly the right nerve. But doesn't that break navigation? If she can control weather, why is the map hard? Oda would just do what he always does. Brutal limits, local manipulation, short duration, and probably nasty stamina costs. She becomes a storm surfer, not a global climate god. The Grand Line still throws insane routes, currents, and magnetic weirdness at them. She just refuses to be bullied in a 20-kilometer bubble. Now plug that into arcs. In Alabasta, she can't fix the kingdom's years-long drought, but she can force desperate, localized rain over a battlefield, visually opposing Crocodile's dryness with this scrappy temporary monsoon. In Whole Cake, she doesn't just yell at Zeus, she contests Big Mom's territory itself, asserting local weather dominance so that Prometheus sputters and Zeus jitters, turning her into a budget Yonko ecosystem rival. And if Nami becomes the sea's mood swing manager, then the next Straw Hat's fruit has to hit something deeper than weather. The stories people tell when they look up at that sky and try to explain what they're seeing. Usopp and the God of Lies, when tall tales become reality. So if Nami gets to bully the climate itself, Usopp has to deal with something way more dangerous. The story people tell about him. Because as far as One Piece disasters go, God Usopp might actually be the funniest and the scariest. Let's lay out his whole mess. Sir Dream Axis. He wants to be a brave warrior of the sea, the guy his mom believed in. Trauma Axis. He's a coward. His dad literally sailed off, and he built this survival system of lying to cope. Role Axis. Sniper, morale officer, campfire storyteller, the dude who turns terror into comedy so everyone else can keep moving. World-building Axis. He's the human bridge between myth and reality, the guy whose tall tales foreshadow the real plot. So when people say, just give Usopp a plant fruit or a sniper fruit that makes bullets curve, to which I say, mate, that's you missing the point. His defining trait is not marksmanship. It's that he lies, constantly, and then Oda, out of sheer spite or genius, makes those lies accidentally come true. The series has already told us what his power fantasy is. Here's an interesting thing. Oda loves conceptual paramecia. Sugar turns people into toys. Perona weaponizes depression. These are fruits about ideas, not elements. So Usopp's ideal fruit is the lie fruit, a lie-truth paramecia, where anything he states as a lie can temporarily manifest as reality. Behind you is a 10-meter giant, and for 30 seconds, yeah, there is. Localized, limited, but real enough to punch you. I want to emphasize the constraints, because otherwise we've just invented Nika 2.0 and broken the story. The system only works if someone believes the lie. Maybe the target has to buy it. Maybe Usopp himself has to believe it for a heartbeat, which is brutal for a coward. To use his power, he has to be the first victim of his own stories. That's how you turn cowardly liar into courageous self-deceiver, in a good way. And to be fair, Dressrosa already beta-tested this. The world sees a random long-nosed sniper pop a sugar headshot, and suddenly he's God Usopp, miracle worker. The fruit just literalizes that dynamic. He becomes a tiny low-tier Nika of narrative, warping local reality through belief, without stepping on Luffy's thematic toes because it's bounded conditional and hilariously unreliable. Now imagine the arc rewrites. Enies lobby. Usopp screams, "The Buster Call came early," and phantom warships loom over the horizon, enough to panic rank-and-file marines. We brought giants, and spectral Oimo and Kashi stomp through the courtyard. Is any of it permanent? No. Is it tactically devastating for a few minutes? Absolutely. Wano gets even better. The legendary samurai stand with us, and translucent heroes rise from the stories of old. There are yokai in the forest, and suddenly the beast pirates are surrounded by the exact folklore they used to terrorize villagers. Usopp becomes the guy who turns rumor into artillery, and if he can weaponize belief like that, then the next Straw Hat's fruit has to tackle something even more intimate than stories and fear. The human body itself, in all of its fragile, modifiable glory. What happens when medicine stops being about treating injuries and starts rewriting what a person even is? Chopper and the healing deity, beyond the Hito. Hito no Mi medicine in One Piece is already borderline magic, so giving the Doctor an actual god fruit sounds redundant, to which I say, good. Redundancy is the only thing standing between you and whatever Caesar Clown has in that next test tube. Right now, Chopper's Hito no Mi is hilariously basic on paper. It's just, animal becomes human. That's it. No phoenix flames, no Buddha shockwaves, just, congratulations, you can file taxes now. And yet, through raw pharmaceutical insanity, he DIYs it into a mythical zone light. Rumble balls are literally him speed-running what awakening is supposed to be, poking at that vague zone instinct and forcing out extra forms the system did not intend. It's janky, it's dangerous, and it's very Chopper. But if Oda can go from Rubber Boy to Sun God of Liberation, then as far as dream alignment goes, Chopper is screaming for an upgrade. His axes are insanely clear. Dream, become a doctor who can cure any disease. Trauma, rejected by reindeer, rejected by humans, then watching Hiruluk die anyway. Role, doctor, biologist, emergency tank when you need a tiny kaiju. World-building need, someone who can stand in front of the world's plagues, bioweapons, and genocidal gas clouds and say no. So we reframe the fruit as a mythical zone, Hito no Mi, model, healing deity, not a phoenix clone, but the archetype of a universal healer. Think a god of medicine whose myth powers are all about understanding and rewriting biology. I want to emphasize, this does not mean instant panacea button. He doesn't snap his hooves and cure cancer. What it does is crank his existing thing to 11. He can manipulate physiology like a living operating theatre, accelerate natural healing, stabilize people on the brink, and interface with diseases and poisons as if they're entities he can negotiate with. And here's an interesting thing. That negotiation is where his trauma lives. A healing deity, Zoan, means he can literally feel the pain and voices of cells, organs, pathogens. Every patient is a choir of suffering in his head. That's incredible power, but it's also a nightmare. Chopper's whole childhood was being told he didn't belong in any herd. Now he's forced to hear the entire world's body crying out. He chases his dream of curing everything while being crushed by the scale of what everything actually is. Run the tape on past arcs and it quietly breaks the setting. Drum? During Walpole's reign, he's not just Hiruluk's weird assistant. He's covertly stabilizing whole villages, buying time against the kingdom's medical apartheid. Punk Hazard? Caesar's Shinokuni gas becomes a battlefield, where Chopper talks the toxin down, peeling it off people's lungs, and turning it inert mid-air. Wano? Queen's Ice. Oni Plague stops being a tragic set piece and becomes Chopper's personal boss fight, as he wrestles the virus like a berserk spirit, rewriting it into a vaccine on the fly. At that point, he's not just the crew's doctor, he's a one-man counter to marine science divisions. And to be fair, once your reindeer is a walking answer to biological warfare, the survival equation shifts. The next Straw Hat's ideal fruit doesn't need to save the body. It needs to protect the one thing that lets that body keep moving, the ship, and the very idea of home on the sea. Frankie and the ship soul fruit, engineering the Thousand Sunny's ghost. So if Chopper is our walking CDC, then the next logical step is, turn the house into a person, which sounds like a horror movie pitch, to which I say, yes, exactly, welcome to Frankie. Frankie runs on 4 axes that Oda keeps poking like exposed wiring. Dreamwise, he doesn't just want to build a great ship, he wants to ride his dream ship to the literal end of the world. His trauma is Tom's death, the criminalization of shipwrights, and the fact that he had to literally rebuild his own body after being run over by the very symbol of that injustice, the sea train. Role-wise, he's shipwright, heavy artillery, and mad inventor all rolled into one suspicious speedo. And in the wider world building, we kind of need a human interface between ships and the sea's will, because One Piece keeps flirting with the idea that ships have hearts without fully systematizing it. Now, the lazy answer is always, give Frankie the metal fruit so he can be Mature Jesus. People love that idea, to which I say, that's actually the worst possible fit. Because as far as Frankie is concerned, his pride is in building with his own hands. His whole character is that he rejected Vegapunk-style pure science worship to become this junkyard artisan. If a devil fruit just auto-upgraded him into a Gundam, it would undercut the core joke and the core pathos. So instead we go conceptual paramecia or mythical Zoan adjacent, the ship soul fruit. A power not over machines, but over the spirits of constructed vessels. Here's an interesting thing. The series already treats ships like semi-living beings, going Mary's Club Ottoman, the way the Thousand Sunny is framed as waiting for them at Sabodi. The fruit doesn't create that. It just lets Frankie talk to it. Mechanically, he'd enter a Sunny mode, temporarily merging with the Thousand Sunny. Shared senses, shared durability, shared pain. He could feel strain in the mast like a pulled muscle, or taste the quality of the wind through the figurehead. In combat, he could animate individual components for autonomous defense. The soldier dock system hatches acting on their own, the coup de burst timing itself, the lion figurehead snapping at intruders. The Sunny becomes a semi-sentient ally instead of expensive furniture. This loops right back into his trauma. The government killed Tom for building a ship too powerful, then weaponized that fear to control the seas. Frankie eating a fruit that lets him become the literal guardian spirit of Tom's legacy is insanely cathartic. He doesn't just build ships that the world fears. He personally stands between those ships and abuse. And to be fair, the retroactive arc implications are filthy. Eni's lobby? He could have interfaced with Puffing Tom, wrestling control mid-rails, turning the symbol of his guilt into an accomplice. Thriller bark? Imagine Frankie contesting Moria for dominance over the island ship itself, Ship Soul versus Shadow Network. Wano, Sunny mode as a roaming fortress, shrugging off Big Mom's assaults, the ship actively dodging cannon fire like a giant lion surfing the waves. I want to emphasize what this sets up. If the Sunny now has a quasi-soul through Frankie, the next Straw Hat's ideal fruit can't just be more metal or tree powers. It has to harmonize with a living ship, not its body, but its voice. Which means we're heading straight into a power that weaponizes sound itself. You're a brook and the Echo Echo fruit, pushing the Yomi Yomi to its musical extreme. So if Frankie accidentally built a ship with a soul, brook is what happens when the soul gets a body as a side project. Because as far as vague conceptual devil fruits go, the Yomi Yomi Nomi is already one of the weirdest in the system. Quick recap. On paper, Yomi Yomi is a one-time extra life. You die, your soul comes back. Congratulations, you're New Game Plus. But Oda looked at that and went, what if we just kept going? And suddenly, Brook is doing full-on soul manipulation, popping out of his body like a ghost, freezing people with underworld chill, and casually walking on water because his body is light. It's a mess in the best way, and I want to emphasize that this is exactly how Oda treats fruits he really cares about. He stacks related ideas until they feel mythic. So what are Brook's axes? Dream-wise, he's simple. Reunite with the Laboon and play music around the world. Trauma-wise, he's not simple at all. Entire crew wiped out. Decades of literal isolation on a haunted ship. Nothing but dust and memories. Role-wise, he's the musician, emotional anchor, and also the guy you yeet out of your body to go scout the enemy base. World-building-wise, he's our bridge between the living world and whatever afterlife vibes Yomi is plugged into. He's already the Straw Hat most entangled with death as a concept, which is why his perfect second layer shouldn't replace Yomi Yomi at all. It should feel like what happens when Yomi awakens or mutates. People love to say, just give Brook a sound fruit, to which I say, yes, but actually make it thematically cursed. Not a clean music Nomi, but an echo style paramecia that controls vibrations, lingering echoes, and the impression sound leaves on a place. Here's an interesting thing. Oda already loves fruits that weaponize abstract leftovers. Perona's Horo turns negative feelings into ghosts. Sugar's Hobby freezes people at the moment of contact. Echo would do that with sound. Brook could replay past conversations embedded in the walls, like a musical poneglyph. He could weaponize his violin into literal shockwaves, slicing with resonance instead of just cold. He could dampen enemy voices, cancel explosions, or turn a concert into battlefield control, where allies get buffed and enemies are lulled into sleep or dredged in their worst memories. And to be fair, that hits his trauma dead on. Brook spent 50 years in a coffin of silence, clinging to the memory of one whale and one song. Giving him the power to fill any space with sound and memory is the exact emotional inverse of that. He's no longer the lonely skeleton on an empty ship. He's a walking archive of every laugh, cry, and promise a place has ever heard. If Yomi Yomi lets him make the dead move, Echo lets him make the past sing. Which sets up a nice contrast because our next Straw Hat doesn't get to cheat with ghosts, echoes, or conceptual nonsense. They're stuck with the most grounded horror show in one piece. The limits of the human body in combat, and what kind of monster you become when you refuse to eat a fruit at all. Sanji's non-fruit paradox, why his perfect devil fruit might be none. So let's talk about the guy who broke the devil fruit meta by refusing to participate. Sanji is the paradox in this whole perfect fruit game, because as far as Oda is concerned, the perfect fruit for him might literally be nothing. And that sounds like a cop-out, to which I say, yes, absolutely, and yet it's also one of the cleanest character decisions in the series. Here's an interesting thing about Sanji. His entire character is built on 4 intersecting axes. Dream-wise, he wants the all blue, the sea where every ocean's ingredients meet, so he's basically a walking culinary world-building device. Trauma-wise, he's the Gemma punching bag, and the kid who almost starved to death on a rock with Zeph. So hunger is not a vague problem to him, it's the original horror. Role-wise, he's the cook, the kicker, and the guy who will feed literally anyone, even enemies. And in terms of the broader system of the world, he's the human link between seas and food cultures. The guy who proves that sharing a meal can cross borders faster than any Buster Call. Now, plug a devil fruit into that. The second you give Sanji a fruit, you threaten the 2 pillars his whole fighting style screams at you. He doesn't use his hands, and he earned everything through physical training. The no hands rule isn't just a gag, it's a moral line. These are for cooking, these are for hurting. Break that, and you flatten the cook versus killer tension. And to be fair, if he suddenly gets some flashy logia, you also undercut the quiet flex of him kicking through fruit-reliant foes with just legs and a nicotine addiction. I want to emphasize how wild Diable Jambe and Ifrit Jambe already are. This man literally lights his leg on fire through spin physics, emotion, and germogenetics. That reads like a paramecia, the heat fruit by any other name. Oda basically gave him a quasi-fruit power without the swimming penalty, and then stacked genetic exoskeleton buffs on top. In Oda's eyes, Sanji's perfect devil fruit is probably the narrative of a guy who reached fruit tier by training and trauma alone. But fine, thought experiment time. If we had to fruit him up without breaking the character, it can't just be fire, but more. It needs to touch his senses, his cooking, and his empathy. So imagine a paramecia around heat regulation, taste and smell manipulation, or more conceptually, the ability to share or transfer nourishment and stamina between people. Not a simple buff fruit, but a system-level support power. Picture a calorie fruit that lets him redistribute calories, hunger, or fatigue. He cooks a dish, you eat it, and he can literally shunt your exhaustion into himself, or convert the empty calories of junk food into clean fighting energy. His restaurant becomes a buff zone. His all-blue dream becomes a global nutrition network. The cost? Every time he saves a starving village, he's the one who feels the gnawing emptiness. Every time he powers up Luffy for one more round with an admiral, he's the one whose body is quietly collapsing. It echoes that rock with Zeph, but now it's a conscious choice, every single time. That's incredibly powerful, but also kind of breaks him, which is why the fruitless version might actually be the healthier narrative. And that sets up a neat contrast, because our next Straw Hat is the opposite kind of purist. Sanji refuses a fruit to protect his hands. The next guy lives and dies by the sword. What happens when you dangle a devil fruit in front of someone whose entire identity is about cutting things clean, and the fruit threatens to turn that purity into something much messier? Zoro and the Sword Soul Dilemma, when a devil fruit threatens the way of the blade. Because as far as purity tests go, Zoro is the final boss. Sanji won't take a fruit because he needs his legs. Zoro feels like he'd refuse a fruit because it might disrespect his sword's feelings, which, in this series, is not even a joke. Let's map his axes. Dream-wise, he's painfully simple. Become the world's greatest swordsman, full stop, no side quests. Trauma-wise, it's Queena's death, and that promise to surpass her, which quietly turns every duel into an argument with a dead 12-year-old. Role-wise, he's the combat monster and de facto vice-captain, the guy who silently agrees to die first so Luffy doesn't have to. And in the world-building, he's the human benchmark. Mihawk is this walking endgame cutscene. Zoro is the grind. He's what pure swordsmanship looks like without lasers, Logias or God Nika rubber hijinks. Here's an interesting thing. Oda has bent the entire power system around, keeping that idea intact. Zoro is haki, steel, and stupid work ethic. No bloodline, no destiny fruit, just, I did reps until reality broke. If you slap a devil fruit on that, you risk turning his climb to Mihawk into, well, he got a good roll on the Gacha banner. And to be fair, that would completely ruin the contrast with Luffy, whose whole deal is destiny hijacking his body. So if he ever did eat a fruit, it can't be I make more swords, or I become a sword tornado and fly away. That's just power creep cosplay. The only version that fits is what we'll call a sword soul paramecia. Not conjuring blades, not turning his arms into katanas, but interacting with the will of existing swords. Basically, the devil fruit equivalent of unlocking the settings menu on cursed blades. We already have the lore for this. Sandai Kitetsu trying to eat his arm, Enma yanking his haki like it's overdrafting his bank account, Shusui being a national treasure with opinions. The series treats famous weapons as semi-living entities, so a fruit that lets Zoro literally perceive and communicate with that will is not even that wild. It's just taking the vague, swords choose their wielders idea and turning the volume up. I want to emphasize the limits here because, as far as bad fanfic goes, this is where it usually explodes. He shouldn't be flying around on giant spectral katanas or spamming new energy slashes beyond what he can already do with haki. The fruit is insight, not raw AP. Reading a blade's temperament, syncing his haki output, maybe manifesting brief spectral extensions of a sword's aura for a single cut, not a whole Gundam. And then you plug that straight into his trauma. Imagine Zoro, for the first time, hearing Wado Ichimonji as an echo of Kuina's will. Not a full conversation, just impressions. Approval, frustration, fear he's fighting for her shadow instead of his own dream. Does he want to surpass Mihawk because he promised a dead girl or because he actually wants it? The fruit doesn't answer. It forces him to stop using Kuina as a motivational crutch. People would yell, "That's just therapy for swords," to which I say yes, exactly. And that's why it works. Zoro's ideal fruit doesn't break the system. It just makes the existing cursed blade mess legible. And if his hypothetical devil fruit is about counseling weapons into being their truest selves, our last straw hat in this opening block is the opposite. His dream is to be the freest man on the seas, and he already accidentally stole a god's freedom fruit. So what does perfect devil fruit even mean when you've literally become the retconned embodiment of liberation? Revisiting Luffy Nika, the control group for perfect fruits. So let's talk about the guy who already broke the assignment. Because if everyone else is getting a perfect devil fruit, Luffy is the control group that escaped the lab, stole the clipboard, and drew a smiley face on God. The whole Gomu Gomu no Mi retcon into Hito Hito no Mi model. Nika is Oda, basically saying, yeah, the rubber thing was funny, but actually it was a liberation deity speed-running Looney Tunes. Here's an interesting thing, that retcon rewires the entire story without invalidating a single punch Luffy had to earn. East Blue Luffy is still just a rubber idiot getting folded by Arlong. Alabaster Luffy still dies of dehydration like a normal clown. Gear Second wrecks his body, because as far as he knows, he's just abusing a mid-tier paramecia. The god label only shows up after we've watched this dude fail, bleed, and lose. So let's restate his axes. Dream. Become Pirate King, which he defines as the freest man on the seas, not the guy with the biggest nuke. Trauma. Sabo's death. Ace's actual death. Shanks losing an arm for him, the constant pattern of people paying the price for his freedom. Role, Captain, Chaos Engine, Joy Vector, the person who walks into a fascist island and accidentally starts a revolution by smiling too hard. World-building need, the human embodiment of liberation and inherited will, the guy who can credibly be Joy Boy without it feeling like a random prophecy pick. Nika ticks all four boxes so cleanly it's kind of rude. Cartoon freedom as literal combat style? That's social liberation as slapstick. A god of liberation whose awakening only triggers after Luffy's emotional breaking points at Marineford, Sabaody, and then the rooftop execution in Wano. That's trauma-synced power scaling. And the second the Gorosei say, oh, by the way, that's the sun god, the entire political balance of the world wobbles. One goofy rubber boy just became a walking void century spoiler. I want to emphasize Oda's restraint here. For 1,000 chapters, this fruit looks mid. Crocodile clowns it. Enel hard counters it. Even Gear 4th is strong, but still loses to Kaido on entry. Only when Luffy's will and dream hit that I will literally die laughing for my friends threshold does the true nature kick in. The fruit is potential, not destiny. The system still demands grind. And to be fair, that's exactly what we've been trying to mirror with Robin's hypothetical memory fruit, Nami's storm deity, Usopp's story made real nonsense, Chopper's overclocked healing Zoan, Frankie's ship fusion, Brook's upgraded soul music, Sanji's judge-proof flame fruit, and Zoro's cursed blade counselor. None of these are meant to be instant Yonko buttons. They're slow-burn, thematic payoffs that only get disgusting once the character's dream and trauma have cooked long enough. Doesn't that make the crew too strong? You might ask, to which I say, yes, and that's the point, but also no. Because every time you give someone a Nika-tier thematic fruit, you're not just buffing damage numbers, you're stapling a wanted poster to their soul. Nami as a literal storm goddess is a world government weather weapon. Usopp making lies real is a propaganda nightmare. Chopper out-oping law draws every warlord, every underworld broker, and Vegapunk's full attention. Power comes with narrative taxes. So, if Nika is our control group, how does this all actually play out on the field? Next, we're going to stress test these fruits against real arcs. Enies Lobby's Buster Call, Marineford's Meat Grinder, and Wano's Yonko Circus. Who survives? Who breaks the story? And who accidentally speedruns Blackbeard's entire plan? Setting the stage for alternate history, how one fruit changes an entire arc. So up to this point, we've basically been running a Straw Hat Devil Fruit draft in God mode. We're in the comfy chair, assigning mythical zoans like it's fantasy football, to which I say, fantastic, but Oda does not write in God mode, he writes in crisis mode. All of these picks sound cool in a vacuum, but One Piece doesn't exist in a vacuum, it exists in Alabasta Sandstorms and Marineford Meat Grinders. So the next phase is where we stop theory crafting in the SBS comment section and start stress testing these fruits against actual canon events. Can Robin's history fruit survive a Buster Call? Does Nami being a weather deity break whole cake, or just make Big Mom cry harder? We're going to find out by throwing these powers into the ugliest parts of the story's timeline. Here's an interesting thing. We're not rewriting the series from scratch. We're looking for what I want to emphasize as pivot points. Specific scenes where a different fruit on a straw hat would realistically tilt the outcome, or the pacing, or the political fallout, without deleting the core beats Oda clearly cares about. Ace still dies. Sabaody still shatters the crew. Luffy still has to ring that stupid bell in Skypiea. But the road to get there? That can get very weird, very fast. Picture O'Hara with Robin's conceptual history fruit instead of Hana Hana. Does the Buster Call still erase the island, or does she literally export its memories somewhere else? At Eni's lobby, does Spandam accidentally broadcast the Void Century to the world because he's an idiot with a history hard drive? In Alabasta, Nami's storm goddess Zoan doesn't just read the weather, she bullies it. Does Crocodile still get his dramatic drought, or does she crash his entire Baroque Works PR campaign with one holy typhoon? And to be fair, this isn't just what if the Straw Hats stomp everyone on episode 1 and go home. Because as far as Oda's storytelling goes, raw power is a tax, not a free coupon. A Marineford, where Chopper is a healing deity, puts him on the same strategic tier as Whitebeard's entire medical corps. That means targeted assassinations, moral panic in the medical community, and Sengoku having to decide whether you Buster Call a reindeer. Same deal in Wano if Nami contests Kaido's weather dominance. That's not just a cool lightning beam clash, that's a direct challenge to his God King aesthetic and Big Mom's storm homies. Blackbeard's crew suddenly has to care less about stealing Luffy's rubber joy toy and more about kidnapping Usopp, because a live fruit that makes every tall tale permanent is a propaganda weapon on par with the Opiope's immortality. So the guiding question going forward is not what's the strongest fruit for each straw hat, it's what's the most Oda-like fruit that makes their dream more dangerous, for them and for the world system wrapped around them? Next we start at O'Hara and see what happens when Robin's very existence becomes a broadcast button for forbidden history. Sanji's perfect fruit isn't fire, why the Mera Mera is a trap pick. So before we start handing out perfect fruits like Oprah with trauma, we need to address the elephant in the kitchen. Sanji and the Mera Mera know me. Because as far as fan picks go, just give the fire guy the fire fruit is one of the laziest ideas on the internet. You're not making Sanji cooler. You're turning him into a worse Sabo with a nicotine problem. Think about what the Mera Mera actually does in the story. With Ace and then Sabo, it's this big, loud symbol of inherited will and public spectacle. Giant fire fists, flaming dragons, blowing up entire battlefields. That's great for revolutionary poster boy Sabo. For Sanji, who is built as a cook, a shadow, and the guy who quietly bleeds in the background so Nami doesn't have to. To which I say, you've missed the point of the character. Let's break his axes down. Dream all blue, the ocean where every sea's ingredients circulate together. Trauma. Starvation on the rock with Zeph, literally eating his own leg. The Barati ethos of feeding even enemies. Then the Germa abuse where he's treated as a failed tool. Role. He's the cook and emotional backbone. The guy who saves lives at sea and also cries the most. Fighting style, legs only, stealth, speed, and a chivalry code that forces him into bad tactical decisions because he refuses to kick a woman. Ever. Now line that up against I shoot big fire now. It doesn't talk to the all blue. It doesn't talk to saving lives. It doesn't even help his no-hands identity. It just stapled Sabo's VFX onto a character who already solved fire without a fruit. Diable Jambe, then Ifrit Jambe, are literally Oda going, "This man's passion and training ignite his body." That's so much more interesting than Logia, I guess. I want to emphasize, Oda loves when power comes from will and craft, not just eating the correct element. And here's an interesting thing, Oda usually avoids redundant gimmicks in the same crew. We don't have a second rubber guy, we don't have a second full-time swordsman. Once Sabo shows up with the Mera Mera, the main fire guy slot at the top tier is basically taken. Could he still give Sanji a fire paramecia? Sure. Would he? Almost certainly not, because it turns the Straw Hats into a vague element chart instead of a dysfunctional family. Oda himself calls Sanji's cooking saving lives at sea in SBS. All blue is about circulation, connection, feeding anyone who's starving. That's a healing, nurturing axis, not a pure offense logia. The perfect fruit for Sanji has to plug into that. Mobility and stealth, so he can move like a wraith. An ability that protects and preserves life, and some kind of battlefield control that keeps his hands free and his legs as the main weapon. So what do you give him instead? Not a louder flamethrower, but something that turns him into an invisible guardian angel, the guy you never see but always feel. And, to be fair, Oda already printed a weird, half-forgotten fruit that does exactly that. We just collectively filed it under neat gimmick and moved on. Next, we dig it back up and ruin your Mera Mera headcanons forever. The Suke Suk Nomi reframed, from perv gag to perfect stealth guardian. So yeah, the cursed fruit we're digging back up is the Suk Suk Nomi, the legendary "I want to spy on the women's bath" fruit. Sanji canonically begging for that, as a kid, sounds like peak gag brain rot. And to be fair, Oda absolutely treated it that way with Absalom. Invisible Lion Man, bazooka hands, zero drip, 100% 2000s anime perv energy. It looked like one of those devil fruits you laugh at once and never think about again. But here's an interesting thing. Oda does not leave powers he likes in the joke bin. He recycles, he upgrades, he retrofits. Absalom dies off screen. Shiryu shows up with Suke Suke, and suddenly invisibility isn't a bathhouse bit. It's horror movie slasher tech. You're in Impel Down, the lights go out, and a guy you can't see cuts you in half. That's not an accident. That's Oda quietly telling us, no, this power was always terrifying, you just met the clown version first. So when we say, this is Sanji's perfect fruit, we're not ignoring the gag. We're arguing that the gag is stage 1 of a reframe. Because as far as Sanji goes, stealth is already one of his main lanes. He sneaks into Aeneas' lobby, through the back door, literally. He infiltrates Whole Cake Island, disappears into kitchens, sabotages the tea party, and half his best moments happen off-panel while the loud people yell about friendship. Then Judge hands him the Germa raid suit, and what does it do? Stealth black. It literally gives him bootleg Suk Suk. I want to emphasize how on the nose that is. Oda basically test ran Invisible Sanji without committing to a fruit. Silent skywalk into enemy territory, sabotage from above, vanish before anyone can credit him. That's already his fighting style. Now imagine Suka Suk on top of that. Invisible blue, walk across the ocean, unseen Diable Jamba to snap a chain without breaking a hostage's neck, slipping into any kitchen on any island to cook for starving people without alerting the Marines. And this is where it syncs with his dream. The all-blue chef who feeds everyone doesn't actually need applause. He needs access. The ability to walk into a hostile navy galley, re-season the soup, free the prisoners, and walk out without a single cannon firing. Oda has literally called Sanji the most considerate straw hat in an SBS, emotionally tuned to everyone's moods. Give that guy invisibility, and you amplify the part of him that acts without demanding recognition. Protecting women without performative speeches, guarding his crew's mental state by overhearing, understanding, nudging. Combat-wise, it's disgusting. Invisible high-speed kicks from nowhere, unseen skywalk ambushes, silent takedowns that don't wreck the ship you're trying to steal. He becomes this maritime Batman who chainsmokes and still refuses to hit women, which is honestly the funniest possible Batman. Does this make him too pervy again? To which I say, have you watched Whole Cake and Wano? The nosebleed gag already got reframed into tragic conditioning and chivalry. Suk Suk becomes a growth test. Can he take the fruit he once wanted for peeping and use it purely for protection? And if Sanji's ideal power is about unseen guardianship, Zoro's perfect fruit is the exact opposite. A devil fruit that drags every inner demon he's hiding straight into the light. Whis, why Zoro should never get a sword fruit, and what he actually needs. And if Sanji's ideal power is about unseen guardianship, Zoro's perfect fruit is the exact opposite. It would slap everything he's been repressing right onto the battlefield, which is exactly why the worst possible move Oda could make is the thing fandom keeps begging for, some hypothetical Kenshi no Mi, sword fruit, press Q to become Mihawk. People pitch this like, Zoro but with a sword body, to which I say, cool, you just deleted his entire character arc. Because as far as Zoro is concerned, the core struggle is brutally simple, become the world's greatest swordsman by his own skill, or die trying. That's tied to every axis of his character. His dream is literally a promise to a dead girl. His trauma is Queena's death. That helpless kid in East Blue who couldn't do anything but swing a wooden sword harder. The guy who almost bled out on Barity. The human sacrifice at Thriller Bark who took on all of Luffy's pain and still refused to fall. His role is the combat pillar and de facto vice captain, and buried under all of that, we now know, is latent kingly will. He's a conqueror, whether he likes the crown or not. Here's an interesting thing. Oda almost never hands out fruits that trivialize a character's defining craft. Chopper doesn't get a doctor fruit that auto-diagnoses people. Nami doesn't get a navigator fruit that GPS locks every current. Usopp doesn't have a sniper fruit that aimbots the entire Grand Line. The system is deliberately janky, because the dream has to be earned, not eaten. A sword fruit for Zoro is like giving Brook a music fruit that plays Bink's sake on command. Fun Gag completely misses the point. And to be fair, Zoro's real conflict stopped being get stronger with swords a long time ago. The question now is what happens when the demon inside him gets stronger than his humanity. Enma literally tries to drink him dry. Asura manifests as this nine-sword murder phantom that nobody, including Zoro, can properly explain. The power creep isn't just numbers, it's how close he is to becoming the monster everyone already sees when he smiles before a beheading. So his perfect devil fruit shouldn't just be more swords. It should 1. Externalize that inner demon, 2. Test his control and discipline, and 3. Mirror his role as the crew's executioner and shield. Zoro is the guy who cuts down what Luffy can't forgive, and stands between the captain and death. His fruit should dramatize that job, not speedrun his swordsmanship. That's why we're not looking at some weapon paramecia. We're looking at a mythical zone, a yokai or underworld entity tied to swords, death, and guardianship. Oda's been nudging us here forever. He called Zoro the straw hat closest to a samurai way before Wano. Then Wano drops sword gods, underworld bosses, graveyards, Enma as a literal hellblade, and suddenly Zoro's power starts to feel way more spiritual than just guy who cuts steel. I want to emphasize, there is a very specific Japanese mythological creature, barely mentioned in One Piece materials, that lines up eerily well with Zoro's journey, his role as executioner, and that cursed Asura form. And once you see it, the Kenshi no Mi is going to look embarrassingly shallow. Mythical Zoan, Zoro and the Asura blade deity you forgot exists. So let's just commit the crime fully. If we're going to steal Zoro's whole soul and rebuild it as a devil fruit, we don't stop at generic sword man. We go straight to mythical zone territory and ask, what if Asura wasn't just a cool panel, but a species? Because as far as Oda patterns go, this is exactly his thing. He'll toss out a technique name like Gomu Gomu no Bajirang Gun, we all clap, and 10 years later he goes, oh by the way, that goofy rubber fruit was secretly the sun god Nika the whole time. So people saying, you can't make Asura into a fruit, it's already a move, to which I say, have you met this man? Retconning techniques into deeper lore is his favourite side hobby. Here's an interesting thing. In Buddhist cosmology, Ashura are wrathful demigods, locked in eternal war, obsessed with pride and duels. That's already Zoro's Twitter bio. So imagine a mythical zone, Ashura no Mi, model, some multi-armed war guardian or sword deity, taking cues from those temple statues with 6 arms, fanged faces, and halos of blades. It maps almost too neatly onto Zoro's bloodlust, his rigid honor code, and that weird way he's both samurai and executioner. The hybrid form basically draws itself. We already saw the silhouette in Eni's lobby, 3 faces, 6 arms, 9 swords. Right now it's this vague spiritual flex, but as a fruit, you give him spectral arms fanning out behind his real ones, phantom blades that extend his slashes, a literal demonic halo made of spinning sword aura. His killing intent stops being metaphorical and becomes a semi-autonomous entity that wants to keep cutting even after the fight is over. Fun, healthy, and to be fair, that's where the trauma and discipline kick in. This isn't a free power-up, it's a possession risk. The only reason Zoro doesn't just dissolve into a murder tornado is because of all that Mihawk training, the constant self-imposed limits, the promise at Thriller Bark to never lose again. The Ashura no Mi turns that into a daily negotiation. Do you let the war god off the leash for one more attack, or do you keep your humanity and your captain's trust? Oda's already halfway there. Asura first shows up in Eni's lobby as pure visual metaphor, then later SBS and databooks describe it as a manifestation of his spirit. A mythical Zoan is literally the cleanest way to canonize that line. It retrofits the old hype moment into a proper entry in the Devil Fruit system without breaking anything, which I want to emphasize is exactly how Nika worked. Role-wise, it's perfect. As de facto vice-captain, Zoro becomes the literal demon at the gate, the guy who steps into hell so the rest of the crew doesn't have to. It reframes nothing happened as not just pain absorption, but a pattern. He's the one who bargains with monsters, including the one living in his own body, and that sets up a neat contrast with Robin. Zoro externalizes a demon to protect people. Robin doesn't need one added. She's already the demon in everyone else's story, which is why her perfect fruit has to work in the exact opposite direction. Why Robin's Hana Hana is already peak Oda, but still not perfect Robin is where this whole video's premise kind of breaks. Because if any Straw Hat already rolled a natural 20 on the Devil Fruit pairing table, it's her. Reassigning Luffy is heresy. Reassigning Robin feels like a war crime. Hana Hana is a masterclass. It externalizes her loneliness in the most literal way possible. A single girl who grew up isolated on every island suddenly becomes a swarm of disembodied hands, always reaching out, never fully allowed to be there. People call her a demon, so Oda just goes, cool, what if she could sprout limbs from your spine? Subtle. And, to be fair, it's not just the trauma aesthetic. Her dream is hyper-specific. Find the Rio Poneglyph, read the Void Century, and basically commit the greatest FOIA request in world history. Her trauma is Ohara erased in fire, her entire field of study criminalized, and her being hunted as a literal child for the crime of knowing verbs. Her role on the crew is archaeologist, intelligence gatherer, silent protector. And she's a late bloomer emotionally, only really allowing herself to live and laugh after Eni's lobby. The fruit lets all of that bleed into the action. Here's an interesting thing about Hana Hana as a power. It lets her be everywhere and nowhere. She can sit in a corner reading while her eyes and ears are scattered through the castle. That mirrors her life, right? Always on the edges of organizations, Baroque works, Crocodile, CP9's radar, never fully belonging, but her influence quietly reshaping everything. Those fields of arms visually sell the idea that Robin's reach, and by extension her knowledge, extends far beyond her one vulnerable body. But as far as world building goes, Hana Hana is still a body manipulation fruit first, and a knowledge fruit second. It's a paramecia about limbs that happens to be wielded by a historian, not a paramecia about history that happens to be good in a fight. Oda's barely scratched what a true, forbidden scholar fruit could do. You look at conceptual fruits like Sugar's Hobby Hobby or Perona's Horo Horo, and you realize the system absolutely has room for history as an actual mechanic, not just a backstory. I want to emphasize the constraint here. We're not trying to give Robin a bigger damage number. We're asking, what fruit would make the world government look at Ohara and go, we didn't burn it hard enough? Something tied to history, memory, the act of reading the world itself. Not just a woman who can break your spine, but a woman who can break the narrative. So we start poking categories. A paramecia that manipulates text, stone, or memory directly. Or a mythical zone based on some deity of records, turning her into the living embodiment of everything they try to erase. Oda already flirts with this vibe. The Ohara tree of knowledge as a quasi-sacred world tree. Real-world books of the dead that guide souls. Big Mum's territory literally featuring an afterlife-like library of souls in books. The man loves fusing library imagery with spiritual stakes. People on the internet might say, isn't that a bit much? To which I say, you watched Luffy become Joy Boy via drum solo and now 2 on the nose is your line? The perfect Robin fruit is the one that lets her not just read history, but physically resurrect it on the battlefield, turning lost eras, dead civilizations, maybe even Ohara itself into weapons and witnesses in real time. The kind of power that would make CP0 lose their collective minds before she ever lays a hand on them. So let's build that fruit. Robin and the memory fruit, turning history into a battlefield weapon. So the fruit we're giving Robin is basically the thing the world government accuses her of being already, a walking crime scene reconstruction. People like to say, that'd be broken, you can't just give her omniscient flashbacks, to which I say, have you seen what Law does casually? We're fine. Call it the Kyoku no Mi, the memory fruit, but very specifically not a mind control fruit. This isn't press X to rewrite your childhood. It's a conceptual paramecia in the sugar/perona lane that manipulates recorded experience. The core idea is simple. Everything that happens leaves a scar on the world, and Robin can touch those scars. She lays a hand on a wall, a ship's railing, a worn flagstone, and she reads the memories etched into it like it's one giant messy poneglyph. Because as far as Robin's whole deal goes, that's literally what Ohara preached. Clover's whole thesis was that the world itself is a text. Oda even called poneglyphs voices of history, and then on top of that, gave Roger this vague, hear the voice of all things power. Here's an interesting thing. The Kyoku no Mi is that, but grounded and archaeological. No magic sea kings, no chosen one prophecy. Just a woman, a ruin, and a playback button. She walks into a void century ruin. She can project its memories around her crew as translucent scenes. Half-rotted cities restored for a moment. Ancient ships sailing phantom waves. A Joy Boy era crowd cheering in a language no one speaks anymore. She cross-checks the poneglyph text with what the stones themselves remember, literally fact-checking history. Did the world government edit the story after the fact? Robin can see the cut footage. And to be fair, that's where it gets dark fast. Because Robin doesn't just get the cool lost civilization reel. She gets the massacres, the cover-ups, the buster calls. She could walk the burned soil of Ohara and watch her mother die again from 10 different angles. She can stand in Eni's lobby and replay every execution the government pretended never happened. The power isn't just knowledge. It's inheriting everyone's forgotten pain and then having to decide, do I show this to the world or let the dead rest? Combat-wise, this is disgusting in a very Robin way. She can weaponize local history, fighting CP0 in some old training hall. She drags the room's memories into the present as full sensory projections of past battles. Enemies are suddenly dodging ghosts of their own instructors, reliving failures, hearing shouted orders from long-gone superiors. It's not illusion in the Kizaru Light Show sense, it's replay. And because she's watching their entire training arc in fast forward, she's also predicting their moves before they throw them. On the support side, she can show the crew the memories of allies who died on that soil. Imagine the Sunny anchored near Marineford's ruins and Robin quietly asking, do you want to see Ace as he was that day? That's brutal, that's ethically messy, and I want to emphasize that this turns Robin into the crew's moral archivist. She has the receipts on the whole world and she chooses what gets screened. So while Frankie's over there turning the battlefield into a scrapyard wrestling match, Robin's turning it into a documentary premiere from hell. And if her perfect fruit lets her weaponize history, his perfect fruit is going to weaponize infrastructure by turning his entire body into a living, modular shipyard. Frankie doesn't need a robot fruit. Why the obvious mecha picks missed the point. And this is where we need to grab the wheel away from the fandom a little. Because as far as popular devil fruit headcanons go, Frankie gets done dirty. Give him the mecha no Mi, the metal no Mi, turn him into Iron Man. To which I say, what do you think he's been doing since Water 7, a light Pilates routine? Frankie already did the robot fruit grind set manually. He got run over by a sea train, rebuilt his own corpse with scrap, and then post-time skip, he literally flies back into the story as a walking toy commercial powered by cola and bad decisions. Any generic Metal Man paramecia is redundant. It doesn't add a new idea to the system, it just slaps a brand label on work he already completed through craftsmanship and sheer insanity. Here's an interesting thing. If we actually track Franky's axes the way we did for Robin, the pattern screams at us. His dream isn't be a robot, it's to build and sail the ship that reaches the end of the world. His trauma is Tom's execution, being blamed for the sea train, and then spending years dismantling ships as a kind of self-hate therapy. His role? Shipwright, heavy artillery, and low-key the crew's hype man. He's the guy yelling, "Super," so Luffy doesn't have to. Now plug that into Oda's fruit philosophy. Ope Ope doesn't replace Law's surgical skill, it weaponizes it. Hana Hana doesn't make Robin good at history by default, it lets her apply that brain in horrifying ways. Oda does not like fruits that erase the need for the character's core craft. Giving Franky a fruit that just says, "You're a robot now," undercuts the entire Water 7 narrative about chosen identity and self-modification. He chose to become a cyborg for Tom and for the ship. A cheap mecha shortcut is actually less interesting than what we already have. I want to emphasize, Franky's real thematic lane is ship as family and future of seafaring, not guy who shoots lasers. Sunny is his magnum opus. He builds her from Adam wood, tattoos her lion on his arm, and then modifies his body as a literal support system for her. He is the living extension of the Thousand Sunny. The weapons are just how he expresses that love in battle. So his perfect fruit shouldn't just be more guns. It should deepen his bond with ships and machines, let him interface with and protect the Sunny in ways no normal shipwright could, and open up new world building about sentient ships and sea travel. And to be fair, Oda has already set the table for this. We have Klabauterman lore, Merry's little hammer-wielding gremlin form, explicit statements that ships can develop hearts when loved by their crew. Who is the most obvious candidate to bridge human and vessel, if not the guy who literally talks to his ship while bathing with it? That's why we start drifting toward a very specific category, a paramecia, or even a zoan that embodies a ship spirit or manipulates materials and structures, turning Franky into a walking dry dock who can evolve the Sunny mid-journey. Imagine him literally syncing with her Klabauterman, upgrading her on the fly as they cross crazier seas. Does that not feel way scarier than Metal Punch, but shinier? Because what we're aiming for is a fruit that doesn't just make Franky the guy who built the Pirate King's ship, but the guy who becomes its guardian spirit in the flesh. And if that sounds a little too mystical for our Cola cyborg, wait until we start mixing ship ghosts, conceptual paramecia, and one very cursed shipwright, Franky and the ship fruit, becoming the Thousand Sunny's living soul. Let's break Franky in the funniest way possible. Give the cyborg who already treats ships like people a devil fruit that treats ships like people. The Fune no Mi, the ship fruit. Conceptual Zoan, special paramecia, whatever label you like, it's the Klabauterman fruit. It's the idea of a ship's guardian spirit turned into a system you can eat. Because as far as obscure One Piece lore goes, this is actually already canon adjacent. Oda literally put the word Klabauterman in an SBS to explain the Going Merry's spirit. And we see that little hammer-wielding guy patching the ship up during Water 7. The anime even pushed it further with that brief humanoid Merry carrying the straw hats one last time, which Oda approved. People called that filler nonsense, to which I say, cool, let's canonize the nonsense and shove it directly into Franky's bloodstream. Here's an interesting thing about the Fune no Mi. It doesn't just let Franky control ships like a remote. It lets him partially or fully merge with any large constructed vessel or structure and become its avatar. Rigging becomes fingers. Cannons become nerve endings. The figurehead becomes his literal face if he wants to be extra about it, which he will. He can warp the hull shape, flex plating, redirect ballast, all like he's flexing his own cyborg muscles. And that slots perfectly into his dream. Franky never wanted to build a museum piece. He wanted to build the ship that survives the end of the world. With this fruit, the Thousand Sunny stops being a static blueprint and becomes a living, evolving combat form. Needs submarine mode for some insane post-10 trench? He reshapes the keel and seals the deck in real time. Needs sky sailing for some late-game Skypiea on steroids cloud sea? He grows wing-like sails and gliding fins. Need a defensive shell against a Buster Call 2.0? He literally tightens the hull into a layered armor sphere while the crew fires back from inside. And to be fair, that's not just cool, it's therapy. Franky is the guy who lost Tom to the government and then watched Going Merry die in his hands. His greatest fear is failing the ship that carries his friends. Becoming a living Klabauterman is the most on-the-nose answer possible to that wound. He cannot abandon the Sunny. His fruit literally pushes him toward go down with the ship as a feature, not a bug. Combat-wise, this gets stupid fast. Imagine Franky's Sunny hybrid modes, where his cyborg arsenal is scaled up to warship size, but still has that don't break the home constraint. City-level coup de burst barrages that use cannon arrays as fingers on a Gatling trigger. Radical beams refracted through the lion figurehead's mouth like a kaiju laser. It's busted, but it still respects that the crew will punch him if he scratches the deck. I want to emphasize how much this fruit cleans up that old merry humanoid sequence. Instead of a vague ghost ex machina, the Fune Fune no Mi makes that kind of manifestation a repeatable conscious state. Franky can let the Sunny stand up during a final voyage moment, and we all ugly cry on schedule. And once you admit the ship fruit exists, the world building goes feral. Suddenly, legendary ships like the Oro Jackson might have had their own spirits awakened, and the ancient weapon Pluton stops being just a blueprint nuke and starts looking like the endgame version of this power. Weaponized ship souls, government-controlled Klabauterman. You can feel Vegapunk getting a migraine. But notice what this does thematically. Franky fuses with the crew's space, their home. The logical counterpart is the guy who fuses with their time, because Brook's ideal fruit isn't about more skeleton gags. It's about turning music and memory into a metaphysical weapon, the same way Franky turns wood and steel into a living promise. Brook already has a mythical zone. So how do you perfect the Yomi Yomi? So if Franky is the ship's body, Brook is the save file. And here's the spicy take. He already ate what is basically a mythical zone, and Oda just lied to our faces about it. Because as far as the classification goes, Yomi Yomi is labelled paramecia. You die once, you come back, congrats on your second life. Very cute, but look at what it actually does. Brook is a resurrection-type being whose soul can detach, go on field trips, slip through walls, freeze enemies with a literal chill of the underworld, and re-enter his bones like a zone retransforming. That's not a rubber body or a jacket gimmick. That's Phoenix Light. You could tell someone this was the Inu Inu no Mi model psychopomp, and they'd probably just nod. And to be fair, that fits his axes almost too well. Dream-wise, Brook wants to fulfill his promise to Laboon and spread joy with music. Trauma-wise, his entire crew dies around him. He spends decades alone on a haunted ship, and his body literally rots away. Role-wise, he's the musician, the morale healer, and the occasional jump-scare weapon when Oda remembers horror exists. Yomi Yomi doesn't fight that, it literalizes it. He is a walking second chance. Here's an interesting thing. Oda has gone out of his way in SBS Answers to link Brook's music to the tone or sound of souls. In Totoland, his concert doesn't just entertain, it scrambles Big Mom's mental script, cuts through her trauma loop, and lets him steal the poneglyph rubbing like it's a side quest. His power is already quasi-supernatural music therapy. When he plays Binks' Sake, it feels like the sound is reaching across the boundary of death to the Rumbar Pirates and to Laboon at the same time. That's not just a buff, that's metaphysics. So why call this fruit near perfect? Because it turns his biggest wound, being the last survivor, into a spectral power. His loneliness becomes range. His death becomes mobility. His music becomes a cable that plugs the living into the dead. You don't really need to fix that, but if we're playing this perfect fruit game seriously, what would even be an upgrade that doesn't just turn him into Moria 2.0 with a skeleton Spotify account? I want to emphasize the constraint here. No zombie armies. That lane is taken. We don't want Brook commanding Thriller Bark 2, Electric Boogaloo. We want him as the crew's emotional time capsule. The guy who remembers every song, every promise, every laughter pattern Luffy has ever had. So the answer isn't more corpses, it's deeper resonance. So imagine Yomi Yomi as a fully acknowledged mythical Zoan of the soul, whose awakening leans into temporal and emotional echo. Not time travel, calm down, but music that can briefly bridge gaps in time. A lullaby that lets a child hear the voice of a parent who sang it years ago. A performance that overlays the memory of the Rumbar Pirates onto the present so the Straw Hats can feel them playing alongside Brook. A song during a storm that lets Laboon, on the other side of the world, feel like the crew is right there for a heartbeat. That's the subtle upgrade. Not a new fruit, but a reclassification and awakening that turns Brook into the Straw Hat's walking record of the journey. And if he's the record, then the question becomes, who's going to be the editor who can weaponize that archive next? Awakened Yomi Yomi, Brook as the Straw Hat's living record and time bridge, and here's where we cheat a little. Because as far as perfect devil fruits go, Brook is the one case where swapping feels wrong. The Yomi Yomi no Mi is already such a clean thematic lock that trying to hand him some random music deity fruit feels like Oda plagiarism. So instead, we do the thing Oda actually loves. We just awaken what's already there. I want to emphasize, this isn't a new power stapled on, it's the logical endpoint of his existing soul gimmick. Right now, Brook's soul leaves his body. He manipulates his own life and death. He chills people from the inside. Awakened Yomi. Yomi takes that same idea and zooms it out from Brook's soul to the vague soul of everything around him. Places, objects, even the atmosphere over the deck during a party start functioning like containers. He plays, and the space itself records. He plays again, and it replays, not just as sound but as emotional state. So Brook becomes a walking soul-based tone dial. Skypiea already gave us the tech, shells that literally store sound and impact. Oda set that up ages ago. Awakened Yomi is just the conceptual paramecia version, except instead of a shell, it's Brook's music, and instead of raw audio, it's the full emotional color of an event. Here's an interesting thing. Tone dials can capture voices of the dead. Brook, the guy who came back from the dead, now becomes the guy who can make the dead feelings of a place speak again. And that immediately loops back to the Laboon Promise. Because what's the one song we all think of with Brook? That little performance on Reverse Mountain that started this whole decades-long waiting game. With Awakened Yomi, Brook can sit on the sunny in the new world, play that same song with the exact emotional waveform of his younger self, and imprint it into the sea itself. Laboon, bashing against the red line, hears it in his bones. It's not a transponder snail call, it's a metaphysical reunion. People like to say that's too sentimental, to which I say, have you met One Piece? Inside the crew, this turns Brook into the archivist. In moments of despair, he can replay the feeling of their first day on the sunny, or the terror of Saberdy when they lost everything, or the stupid joy of a post-Enies lobby feast. Not illusions, not mind control, but a shared emotional flashback that tightens the bond when it's about to snap. Need Luffy to remember why he can't give up on being Joy Boy? Brook can literally make him feel Marineford again for 3 seconds. And to be fair, that's horrifying in combat. Brook can weaponize borrowed emotions, the hopelessness of Ohara, the suffocating rage of Wano, the panic of a Buster Call. He taps an enemy's soul and overlays a recorded feeling, like slamming a trauma filter onto their mind. It doesn't rewrite their will, but for a heartbeat, they're drowning in someone else's worst day. The catch is ethical. Brook has to choose what to keep. Does he preserve every breakdown, every funeral, every moment Robin wanted to die? Or does he let some memories fade so the crew can actually move on? He could trap them in nostalgia loops, or keep reopening wounds because it makes us stronger, which is a very One Piece kind of mess. So if Brook is the living record, Jinbe is the guy who has to read that record and make policy. His perfect fruit can't just be better Fishmen karate. It has to turn him into a better statesman of the sea, someone who can actually negotiate with the weight of all those memories behind him. Jinbe doesn't need a water logia, the real gap in the helmsman's kit. And this is where we need to commit a One Piece war crime, saying that Jinbe with a water logia is actually a bad idea. People love to slap a Mizu Mizu no Mi on him and call it a day, to which I say, you're just turning the slider from S tier to more S tier and calling that character design. Because as far as water control goes, Jinbe already plays in logia territory without needing the gacha roll. Fishman Karate literally lets him punch the moisture out of the air, redirect ocean currents, and hard counter Big Mom's tidal wave homie. He doesn't need a water element, he is a water system. Making him a water logia is like giving Enel a battery pack. Funny, but thematically lazy. Here's an interesting thing. When we track Jinbe's big moments, they're almost never about raw damage. His axes are diplomacy and trauma. Dreamwise, he's the guy carrying Fisher Tiger and Queen Otaheim's will for peaceful coexistence, the Sun Pirates' impossible middle ground, the whole sign of protection deal with Big Mom so Fishman Island doesn't get erased, compromise. His life is basically a series of hostage negotiations with history. Trauma-wise, he's been crushed between every bad option the world offers fishmen. Join a warlord system that hates you, or leave your people undefended. Bend the knee to Big Mom, or watch Fishman Island get yonkoed. That's why his role on the Sunny isn't just tank or water guy. It's helmsman, senior advisor, and walking political bridge. And to be fair, Oda telegraphs this constantly. Jinbe's highlight reel is speeches. The Impel Down cell talks with Luffy. The Fishman Island confession about his failures. The moment he rejects Big Mom's cup and asks if she's prepared for the consequences. Reverie chatter has Kings casually dropping Fishman discrimination as a policy problem, while we, in the background lore, know there's exactly one pirate they'd actually trust in that room, Jinbe. So if we just buff his water punches, we flatten him into stronger fishman. Cool, but boring. His perfect fruit should amplify his ability to steer the currents of people, not just the currents of the sea. Remember the Fishman Island prophecy about the man who will guide the island to the surface? Jinbe is positioned as that guy's right hand, the one both pirates and world leaders will actually listen to. I want to emphasize, we are not giving Jinbe mind control. No press X to pacify Akainu. The lane we want is a fruit that lets him read and gently redirect the flow of conflict the same way he redirects tides and ship momentum. Emotional tides, social currents, the build-up of a riot before it explodes. What if he could feel that like a change in the swell? Imagine a power that ties together sea currents, communication and guidance, so that Jinbe stops being just the helmsman of the Sunny and becomes the helmsman of this entire new age, a literal lighthouse fruit. And yes, that sounds vague, but the specific version we have in mind is weird, obscure, and kind of perfect for him. Jinbe and the Tide fruit, helmsman of seas and souls. So let's actually cash that in and name it, the Shio no Mi, the Tide fruit. Not a big, flashy water logia that turns you into a walking tsunami, to which I say, congratulations. You just hard counter your own captain. This is a paramecia that doesn't control water volume at all. It controls direction, strength, and rhythm. It's less I am the ocean, and more I am the steering wheel for everything that already moves. Here's an interesting thing that instantly turns Jinbe from best helmsman into illegal patch for the entire Grand Line's bad UI. With Shio, he can feel the pull of ocean currents like extra limbs. Calm belt, he can literally thread the Sunny along microscopic underflows between sea kings. Undersea routes like the path to Fishman Island, he rides the deep currents that surround the Red Line, bending them so the ship glides through pressure shifts that would normally crush it. He becomes a navigator-helmsman hybrid on the level of a living log pose. But because as far as Oda is concerned, everything is feelings, that tide sense can't just be physical. Socially, Jinbe starts reading currents in people the same way he reads the sea. He walks into a tense Fishman district meeting and feels the room tug toward violence, the way a swell pulls toward a reef. He doesn't brainwash anyone, and to be fair, that would be wildly off-brand. Instead, Shio lets him nudge, adjusting the flow of conversation, the rhythm of his voice, the sheer weight of his presence so that anger ebbs or courage rises, like a controlled tide. Not hypnosis, just weaponized vibe control. I want to emphasize how on the nose that is for his dream. Jinbe is the guy who literally walked away from Big Mom because he refused to stay a tributary. His whole life is about changing the course of history. For Fishmen, one treaty, one gamble, one kid. He stops from joining Arlong 2.0 at a time. Shio turns that metaphor into a system. He can feel when discrimination is about to spike into pogroms, when a negotiation is about to collapse, and he chooses whether to let that wave crash or quietly redirect it out to sea. Tie this into obscure lore and it gets even nicer. Fishman Island survives because of the Sunlight Tree Eve, this absurd world tree whose roots pull light and nutrient-rich currents down from the surface. With the Tide fruit, Jinbe basically becomes a mobile Eve extension. On the battlefield, he redirects the nutrients of momentum. Enemy charges trip over each other as the ground's subtle moisture shifts like undertow. Formations fold as their collective movement gets turned sideways while allies suddenly find themselves in perfect sync, riding a shared wave into a combo attack. But that kind of power comes with a nasty ethical rip current. If you can always tilt the tide, when do you stop? Does he have the right to calm a justified rebellion because it might get kids killed? Or to amplify hatred against the celestial dragons to force the world to change faster? Jinbe, the man who preaches mutual understanding, now has a fruit that tempts him to quietly overwrite people's natural flow. And once we give him that, zoom out for a second, we've now handed almost every Straw Hat a fruit that hard locks them into their thematic lane. So what actually happens to the big arcs? How different is Marineford if the crew already has this kind of conceptual power spread? How does the balance against Yonko and Admirals shift when the Sunny is basically a floating reality editing think tank, rewriting Enies lobby and Marineford? How these fruits reshape the big wars? So now the Sunny is a floating reality editing think tank, but we're not turning this into Straw Hat's Solo the World definitive edition. The point isn't power creep fanfic. The point is asking, if Oda had these fruits in mind from day one, how do the big wars feel different while still punching us in the same emotional gut? Because as far as Oda is concerned, devil fruits are narrative tools first, combat tools second. He's literally said he thinks of weird abilities, then figures out fights later. So we're just leaning into that. Take Enies lobby. Imagine Sanji with the Suke, not as perv invisibility, but as the ultimate support unit. He's cutting the C-train chains, slipping through CP9 corridors, feeding intel to Nami and Chopper like a stealth call center. We get sequences where doors open by themselves, cuffs drop off, guards are mysteriously knocked out, and only later, the reveal that Sanji choreographed half the rescue without ever being seen. It turns his Mr. Prince gag into a full espionage fantasy. Here's an interesting thing. Robin's memory fruit doesn't actually change the Buster Call outcome, but it makes the walk to the Tower of Justice much darker. Every stone she touches flashes with past executions, mothers begging, scholars burned. When she screams, "I want to live," she's not just afraid of dying. She's rejecting this centuries-long pattern of the government erasing people and their memories. She chooses to stand as the one person who will not let those memories be deleted. Same scene, way heavier subtext. And Zoro, give him that nascent Ashura Zoan in the Kaku fight. Every time he pushes the form, we see it bite back. Extra arms flicker in with a mind of their own. Blades twitch toward allies. His voice overlaps with something older and angrier. It's awesome, but it's also a little horror movie. To which I say, yes, Zoro should be one bad decision away from becoming the cursed guardian of Enies lobby forever. Jump to Marineford. A pre-time skip Jinbe with proto-Tide isn't summoning tsunamis. He's feeling the battlefield like a living current. He yanks Luffy away from death, not just by luck, but because he senses the flow of cannon fire and admiral movements. The near misses get visually coherent. We see shockwaves as ripples, Jinbe riding them. And to be fair, Ace still dies. The tide of history doesn't budge, but Luffy and Jinbe's failure reads like two tiny swimmers trying to redirect an entire ocean. Brook's early Yomi twist lets him quietly record the emotional weight of the war. Quick shots of him plucking strings as Whitebeard falls, as Kobe screams at Akainu, implying that this battle will literally echo into the next generation's songs. It's not stronger, it's just sadder. Sabaody gets weirder. Frankie's ship fruit lets him partially merge with the Sunny, turning the Grove escape into a mecha siege. He plants himself on deck. Hull plating grows over his arms, and he physically intercepts Kizaru's light kicks, cracking but not quite shattering. Usopp's storytelling fruit weaponized against the Pacifista lets him narrate them as invincible demon machines, so hard that fodder pirates and even some marines panic, clogging the battlefield. Fear becomes friendly fire. I want to emphasize none of this flips outcomes. Kuma still presses the Straw Hat delete button, but the framing tightens around each character's thematic lane, which is exactly how Oda already uses stuff like Sugar's Hobby or Perona's Ghosts. And if the crew is this thematically optimized now, what does that do to endgame matchups? Because Blackbeard's team is basically the anti-Straw Hat fruit philosophy. Brute force, selfish usage, zero poetry. So when conceptual fruits finally clash with pure opportunism, who actually wins that argument? Balancing against Yonko and Blackbeard, why perfect doesn't mean broken. So on paper, yeah, we've basically turned the Sunny into a floating X-Men mansion, to which I say, only if you think of One Piece like a damaged spreadsheet. If your first instinct is, won't this just make the Straw Hats steamroll Yonko? You're kind of telling on yourself because as far as Oda is concerned, raw numbers are the least interesting part of the power system. Here's an interesting thing. Most of these perfect fruits are aggressively sideways upgrades. Nami as a storm goddess isn't suddenly nuking islands like Whitebeard. She's just turning the already existing climate science gag up to 11. Usopp as a story god doesn't beat Kaido in a beam clash. He weaponizes lies, morale, and fear. Chopper's healing myth is closer to Ope's surgical drama than to a buster call. Robin's memory fruit and Jinbe's tide fruit are information and terrain control. That's utility, not planet buster energy. Compare that to Blackbeard's crew, who are literally playing gacha for the most violent fruits possible. Darkness that deletes powers, quakes that break continents, warps invisibility, probably some future delete the concept of distance nonsense. They're the min-max build your sweaty MMO friend runs. The Straw Hats, even in this version, are the roleplay optimized party. Navigator deity, doctor deity, shipwright spirit, musician record keeper. Less global annihilation, more absurdly specific win condition. And that contrast is what makes matchups fun instead of a stomp fest. Sanji's Suke versus Shiryu's. Same base fruit, completely different philosophies. One uses invisibility to protect and prank, the other to backstab. Zoro's Ashura plus a cursed adjacent fruit facing a pure stats swordsman on Blackbeard's crew turns into weird metaphysical sword ghost versus I hit very hard. Robin rewriting memories against someone who erases evidence or records is a courtroom duel, not just a punch-up. Brook's record spirit powers clashing with Blackbeard's darkness, which erases light and sound, becomes a battle over whether history itself can be swallowed. And to be fair, Oda has basically told us he doesn't want Luffy's crew to feel like a traditional hero party. He said in SBS and interviews that he likes powers that are inconvenient, that force creativity. Luffy is rubber. Robin breaks her own back if she overextends. Brook is a skeleton who gets body checked by dogs. These fruits keep that vibe. They're weird, conditional, and a little bit of a mess. So against Admirals and Yonko, nothing actually changes about the fundamental math. They still need haki, suicidal teamwork, and that straw hat. What if we did the dumbest possible thing perfectly? Energy. The fruits widen tactical options and crank up emotional storytelling, but they don't suddenly let Nami solo Akainu. Tides can't rewrite human nature overnight, memories can't resurrect the dead, ship spirits still crack when the hull does, and mythical forms always dangle the risk of losing control. I want to emphasize, limitations are Oda's favorite toy. Gear 5 is literally a god fruit and it still runs on cartoon drawbacks and exhaustion. These conceptual fruits would be the same. Huge ceiling, hilarious fine print. Which sets up the real question. Now that we've sketched this alternate ecosystem, what does it say about the choices Oda actually made? And are some of these perfect fruits already hiding in plain sight, quietly attached to side characters we've written off as jokes? What our perfect fruits reveal about Oda's endgame plans? So here's the twist. After all that min-maxing and fantasy drafting, the pattern that actually pops out isn't make the Straw Hats broken. It's make their powers rhyme with their dreams, their traumas, and their jobs on the ship. To which I say, yeah, that's just Oda on a Tuesday. Because as far as devil fruits go, he already does this constantly. Luffy doesn't just get a rubber body, he gets a literal joy god tied to liberation. Law doesn't just get surgery hacks, he gets the Ope Ope, a fruit about rewriting fate for a guy who wants to dismantle the system that killed his town. Robin's Hana Hana isn't a generic clone power, it's a lonely kid manifesting herself into rooms she's not allowed to be in. All we did was crank that same logic up to 11 for everybody. And here's an interesting thing. A lot of the concepts we played with are already hiding in the lore like background NPCs. Ship spirits? Klabauterman are canon, snuck into Usopp's Water 7 breakdown. Memories of places? We've got stuff like Pudding's Memo, Sugar's conceptual hobby, and random SBS answers, where Oda offhandedly mentions fruits that affect stories or emotions. Tides of history? We already have Fujitora literally dropping meteors and Greenball sucking life out of landscapes. The seeds are everywhere, we just watered them aggressively. I want to emphasize that this actually shows how much room is left in the current fruits before we even start handing out new ones like party favors. Brook's Yomi. Yomi is still in toddler mode. If death is a concept, awakening that could mean guiding souls, resurrecting memories, or replaying a location's last song. Robin's Hana is already skirting reality warping with giant clones. Awakened, she could bloom knowledge itself, not just limbs. And Nami's weather tech plus a hypothetical weather-themed awakening? That's a storm deity without ever touching a mythical zone. And to be fair, not every perfect idea needs to land on a straw hat. A pure memory fruit feels tailor-made for some rival historian who forces Robin to confront what forgetting actually means. A ship fruit that weaponizes Klabauterman sounds like the exact kind of nightmare Blackbeard would hire. A tide fruit for a marine admiral who can literally raise and sink battlefields. That's the world government saying, hey, what if geopolitics but as a guy? Oda's even told us, in SBS and interviews, that he keeps certain fruit ideas on the shelf, waiting for the right character at the right time. That's his whole thing. Thematic fit first, raw cool factor second. So if you want to predict future fruits or awakenings, stop asking, what would be the most busted? And start asking, what would hurt this character in exactly the right way that it forces them to grow? Because that's the real power system. Which brings us to the next phase. We've reimagined the crew, stress-tested them against the story, and seen how these powers could slot in. Now we're going to flip the lens and go hunting through canon for fruits that already exist, but feel suspiciously like they're waiting for a very specific ally or enemy. And one of the wildest, most obscure fruits in the franchise might already be quietly foreshadowing the power of the final straw hat we still haven't met. Why Zoro's perfect fruit is a mythical zone, and not what you think. So when people say, Zoro's perfect fruit is obviously the dice fruit, he becomes a walking blender, to which I say, that is the most boring possible answer. That's not a power-up, that's a Home Depot sponsorship. It just takes his existing crutch, swords, and slaps more metal on it, instead of asking the actually interesting question. What happens if you weaponize the guy instead of the gear? I want to emphasize something we set up earlier with Luffy, Law, and Robin. Oda doesn't pair fruits to aesthetics. He pairs them to inner identity and dream. Luffy gets a god of freedom. Law gets a surgeon's operating room that doubles as a moral dilemma engine. Robin literally blooms limbs because her whole life is about reaching out to forbidden history. So if we're being honest, Zoro's ideal fruit can't just be more blades, but shinier. It has to externalize his ongoing fistfight with death, curses, and this very uncomfortable, very real kingly aura he keeps pretending he doesn't have. Here's an interesting thing. As far as Wano is concerned, Oda already soft-launched a devil fruit concept for Zoro. King of Hell, Zoro, black flames licking off him, arguing with a literal Grim Reaper vision while his cursed swords try to eat his lifespan. That's not just edgy branding, that's mythical zone foreshadowing. So the fruit we're pitching is a mythical zone tied to the underworld itself. Call it a Shinigami Zoan, a Yamano Kami Zoan, a King of Hell Zone, some death deity baked into the system from ancient times. In practice, that kind of fruit gives him the classic mythical zone package. Absurd durability, regeneration that feels like a more brutal, cursed version of Marco's flames, and a spectral aura that wraps around any weapon he picks up. The key is that it makes the swords interchangeable. The real cutting power becomes his spirit pressure, not the brand name on the blade. Suddenly, losing Shusui doesn't matter as much. The curse is coming from inside the swordsman. And to be fair, that sounds like a cheat until you plug in Quina. This isn't a convenience fruit, it's a burden fruit. The Shinigami aura is always trying to spill out, always trying to drag people toward death. If his will wavers, that pressure hits allies too. So his promise to become the world's greatest swordsman turns into, I will climb to the top without letting this cursed god inside me kill the people I swore to protect. That's not less struggle, that's turning his whole career into Enma training on hard mode. Combat-wise, this opens a ridiculous bag of tricks without breaking the story. Spectral limbs that can wield extra swords, echoing Asura, but now grounded in a mythical zone explanation. Brief intangibility where his body becomes a deathly haze, letting him walk through attacks that should kill him. A ferry the soul mechanic, where his slashes don't just cut flesh, they drag your consciousness toward a death-like state. Mirroring Thriller Bark, when he shouldered Luffy's pain and almost died standing. From a world-building angle, imagine the propaganda, a Shinigami or Yama mythical Zoan user riding with the future Pirate King. Marines would treat Zoro like a walking buster call. Pirates would whisper that the Straw Hats literally bring death to old eras. It even retrofits that weird Grim Reaper vision in Wano. Was that an external entity, or his dormant Zoan trying to claim the body? And if you plug this fruit back into earlier arcs, things get messy in a fun way. Thriller Bark with a genuine King of Hell. Zoro turns the nothing happened moment into a full-on underworld contract scene. Enies Lobby Zoro uses spectral arms to dual wield on top of Usopp, while still carrying the others. But the real question is, how does a fully realized King of Hell Zone Zoro stack up against actual Yonko Commanders and Admirals? We're going to stress test that power fantasy later and see who still walks away. Rewriting Thriller Bark, Zoro's King of Hell Zone versus Kuma. So, if base Zoro is already trading blows with Yonko Commanders, a fully realized King of Hell, Zone sounds like it just deletes tension, right? To which I say, no, it makes Thriller Bark way worse. Because as far as emotional stakes go, Guy with Swords Bleeds Out is sad, but actual death, God silently agreeing to die in your place, is nightmare fuel. Let's rewind to the canon cut. Kuma shows up with that impossible demand: hand over Luffy or everyone dies. Sanji tries to martyr himself. Zoro casually commits attempted friend murder by knocking him out. And then we get that deal. Kuma pops Luffy's pain and fatigue into that giant pore bubble, gives the most evil tutorial prompt in the series, and walks off. Zoro steps in, takes it all, and when the crew finds him, nothing happened. That's the moment he stops being just the right hand and becomes the crew's silent guardian. The guy whose job is literally to suffer, where Luffy can't. Now we drop the fruit in, picture Zoro already having a Shinigami, or Yama-style mythical zone. Kuma's Nikyu Nikyu no Mi expels Luffy's agony, but this time, when the bubble forms, Zoro partially transforms. Horns, shadowed eyes, maybe that skeletal ribcage aura from Enma, but dialed up. Here's an interesting thing. Instead of just walking into a red bubble, he uses the Zoan's underworld aspect to bind it. Ghostly chains shoot out from his spectral ribs, hook into the pore bubble, and you literally see Luffy's suffering dragged link by link into Zoro's body. I want to emphasize this doesn't make him immune. The fruit isn't a pain delete button, it's a capacity multiplier. He becomes a vessel of torment, not a bypass. The chains rattle, the spectral ribs start fracturing, his aura flickers. The idea is that this Zoan lets him host more agony than any normal human, which perfectly lines up with his role as the guy who shoulders everything so Luffy can keep grinning like an idiot. Choreography-wise, Kuma still tests him. Zoro activates a partial Zoan form just to stay standing under that pressure blast, spectral armor cracking with each hit. You get this horrible visual escalation. First the ghostly ribs shatter, then the chains begin to snap, and the only way to keep the pain anchored is to drop the form and take it raw. So Zoro de-transforms on purpose. No spectral buffer, no death god armor, just human flesh swallowing divine level suffering until he's standing in that iconic blood lake. And to be fair, the fruit actually makes the character test harsher. The system tempts him with options. He could redirect some pain into the ground, bleed it off into the air, maybe even share it with the underworld. He refuses. He keeps it all inside, because even in demon mode, he won't let anyone else pay for Luffy's dream. That choice pays off later. Imagine Marineford or Onigashima with this zone. Zoro as a battlefield reaper, cutting through fodder while siphoning killing intent and fear, stacking invisible spiritual scars on top of every physical one. Cool, but also kind of a mess psychologically. And if he's the crew's Grim Reaper, then obviously the next Straw Hat needs to be their living weather god. So what devil fruit turns Nami into a literal storm deity without breaking the power curve? Yeah, we're going there next. Nami deserves a weather god, not just a better climate act. So people online love to say, just give Nami Anel's Goro Goro and call it a day, to which I say, that's not a character choice, that's lazy elemental cosplay. It's the Funko Pop version of power scaling. Because as far as Nami is concerned, lightning is just one angry symptom of a much bigger system. The sky that tried to kill her and then became her escape route. Here's an interesting thing. Arlong didn't just own Kokuyasi's people, he owned their environment. He controlled the sea, the maps, the borders, the literal horizon line. Nami's entire childhood was being forced to chart the prison she lived in. The sky above that village is this double-edged thing. Storms that threaten to drown them, winds that might finally carry her and Nojiko away. That's why she clings so hard to the dream of mapping the entire world. It's not cartography as a hobby, it's, I will never be trapped in someone else's weather again. So if we're talking perfect devil fruits, why would we downgrade that to girl who shoots better lightning? Nami doesn't need a battery pack, she needs a promotion. Mythical Zoan or special Paramecia, weather deity model. Something in the Eime no Uzume or Raijin Fujin family, where the fruit isn't you are now thunder, it's you are the conversation between storm and wind. I want to emphasize that the core idea isn't damage numbers, it's agency. She should be able to read, negotiate with, and literally embody weather. Thematically, it's kind of perfect. Luffy gets the sun god, the rubber boy, who accidentally became the heartbeat of liberation. Nami, the navigator who wants to draw the world, gets the fruit that lets her hear the global nervous system connecting every sea. Imagine her hearing the sky the way Luffy hears the voice of all things. Cloud fronts whispering about distant islands, jet streams carrying rumours of reverie politics, barometric pressure shifts that feel like someone else's anxiety attack. In practice, that means localised climate domains around the sunny, like a moving mini new world that she can tune. Clear skies for travel, sudden crosswinds to slingshot them, a fog pocket that eats marine vision, long-range storm steering where she doesn't summon hurricanes out of nowhere. She leans on existing systems, nudging a cyclone 30 kilometers off course with these dance-like movements that echo traditional Kagura. And because Nami is a con artist first and a hero second, she's absolutely weaponizing microclimates. Mirages from heat differentials, fake islands hanging on the horizon, phantom lighthouses in the fog, whole fleets sailing in circles inside her weather maze while she quietly robs their holds. It's psychological warfare via humidity. Now, and to be fair, full weather god Nami would snap the setting in half if we let her casually delete the calm belt. So we cap it. Regional influence that scales with knowledge. She can't brute force Grand Line anomalies she hasn't studied. She has to earn that control by doing the things she already loves, researching, observing, mapping. You drop that fruit into Alabaster or whole cake and suddenly those arcs are unrecognizable. Crocodile's drought, Big Mom's tantrum weather. Nami turns both into bargaining tables. And that's exactly what we're going to break down next. The what-if timelines where Storm Goddess Nami quietly rewrites entire sagas. Alabaster, Skypiea, and Whole Cake. If Nami was a weather deity. So let's rewind to the first place this fruit would have broken the story in the best way, Alabaster. That entire saga is literally a climate war. Drought, stolen rain, a kingdom being gaslit by Baroque works' weather terrorism. Oda basically built Nami's thematic playground and then said, what if she just had a stick and a dream? Which, to be fair, was already pretty cool. With a nascent weather god zone, though, she walks into Nanohana and immediately winces. The air tastes wrong. The upper currents are choked. She can feel this vague chemical grit clinging to the moisture cycle, dance powder residue. Instead of Vivi desperately connecting dots, Nami just closes her eyes, senses the missing convection over Alabana, and goes, yeah, someone's literally stealing your sky. People like to say that would kill the mystery, to which I say, mate, the mystery was never who did it. It was, can anyone stop a warlord weaponizing climate despair? Here's an interesting thing. That fruit doesn't need her throwing lightning at Crocodile. It lets her stage a science demonstration on a national scale. Picture Nami forcing a narrow, temporary rain corridor over one city, maybe Yuba or Katoria, by bullying the high-altitude winds back into alignment. One green stripe of storm cutting through a dead desert. The rebels feel rain on their faces for the first time in years, while the surrounding sands stay bone dry. Suddenly, the propaganda collapses. Koza has proof the drought is manufactured. Vivi has leverage in every negotiation, and Crocodile's whole act of God narrative turns into act of weird Sandman with a weather fraud scheme. Jump to Skypiea, and the fruit gets existential. Nami's always loved the sky. Now she can literally hear it breathing. She feels how thin the air is, how the island clouds have this stable, almost gentle density. Then Enel's lightning hits, and it's like static in her skull. His thunderheads don't move like storms. They move like a guy dragging a cursor. Because as far as the natural sky is concerned, he's griefing the server. So instead of trading blows with a Logia, she griefs him back. She can't beat his raw power, but she can peel away his coverage, redirect his thunderheads into empty sea, carve safe, stormless channels around Upper Yard. Suddenly, omnipresent God becomes annoying regional boss whose range keeps getting throttled. The crew aren't sneaking through Enel's domain. Nami is literally editing the map in real time. Whole cake is where this gets almost metaphysical. Big Mum's climate homies are basically sentient weather contracts. Zeus, Prometheus, the whole mess. A weather god Zoan gives Nami spiritual standing in that system. She doesn't just yell at Zeus, she can speak the same elemental language his soul bond is written in. So imagine she doesn't merely borrow him. She offers Zeus a counter-contract, a stable, cozy microclimate around the sunny, a permanent playground instead of Big Mum's mood swings. For a moment, his link to Mama flickers. You get this tug-of-war over the soul of a storm cloud, with the sky itself creaking under two different ownership claims. I want to emphasize this still doesn't make Nami a frontline bruiser. She's the battlefield architect, the narrative pivot that turns unbeatable environment into negotiable system. And if that sounds fun, wait until we give Usopp a fruit that does the exact same thing to reality itself, by weaponizing lies. Usopp's perfect fruit, the god of lies and stories. So when people say Usopp should get a sniper fruit like laser eyes or the poke no mi, so he can store 1,000,000 bullets, to which I say, congratulations. You've turned the most thematically rich straw hat into a very loud, very anxious gun turret. Because as far as the story is concerned, Usopp's real power has never been numbers on a stat sheet, it's narrative manipulation. Here's an interesting thing. From chapter 1 of his life, this dude's lies keep getting grandfathered into reality. Syrup Village Usopp is that kid yelling, "The pirates are coming," as a bit, and then, oops, actual pirates. He tells tall tales about being a great warrior of the sea, then accidentally becomes the only guy on the crew with a confirmed body count during Alabasta. He invents Sogeking as a coping mechanism, and the mask somehow has better social stats than his real face. Dressrosa literally kneels to God Usopp off a chain of coincidences and crowd psychology that would make any propaganda ministry blush. So instead of buffing his eyeballs, we give him a fruit that buffs the story. Call it the Uso Nomi, the Light Fruit, or, if you want to get fancy, a mythical zone of a trickster deity, some Tengu or Kitsune of stories. The base idea is simple. Anything he declares can temporarily manifest, but only if it plugs into emotion and belief. It's one of those conceptual, paramecia-type fruits the data books love, sitting in the same weird family as Sugar's Hobby or Perona's Horo. The rules matter because otherwise we've just handed him a no you button for reality. His lies only gain power when someone believes them, when they spark courage or panic, or when they line up with a story the world already wants to tell. If he screams, "Behind you, 100 giants," and the enemy flinches, those giants blur into half-real silhouettes for a few seconds. If he tells a village, "Help is coming," the great Captain Usopp never abandons the weak. The universe quietly nudges probabilities so that he actually pulls off the rescue he just overpromised. Now plug that into sniping. Usopp already does impossible geometry with a slingshot. Imagine him calling his shots as incantations. This pellet will curve around the castle, through the cannon barrel, and explode in that guy's pants. If his allies trust him, the trajectory gets that tiny metaphysical assist. He can declare fake weak points. That armor shatters if you hit the blue gem, and if the enemy panics and guards it, the gem starts to actually crack. Illusions gain just enough physicality to hurt, projectiles get probability buffs, and battlefields turn into collaborative fanfics. And to be fair, this is where we have to nerf it. He's not rewriting history, he's not reviving Ace, he's not deleting gravity. The fruit makes illusions that can briefly interact with the world or tilt odds, not permanent edits to the code of the universe. It's a narrative assist, not admin privileges, which loops us back to God Usopp. Dressrosa stops being just a gag and starts reading like foreshadowing. The more people talk about Usopp, the more those stories literally weaponize themselves around him. He becomes a walking rumor engine, a god of propaganda and hope for cowards who still want to stand up once, just once. I want to emphasize, that's Oda putting a tiny version of himself on the crew, a storyteller whose words shape reality. And if that sounds too meta, Wait until we stress test the Uso no Mi against Enies Lobby and Dressrosa and see how many impossible moments it quietly explains. Enies Lobby and Dressrosa, reimagined when Usopp's lies come true. So let's drop the Uso no Mi straight into Enies Lobby, because as far as stress tests go, rescue your mum friend from the world's most bureaucratic death laser is pretty high tier. Usopp's whole Sniper King phase is already him beta testing a devil fruit without the devil fruit. He literally lies a new identity into existence, and everyone buying into Soga King gives him this weird psychological buff. That's a proto-myth power system right there. We just didn't have the vocabulary. Now give him the Light Fruit on top of that. When he says Sniper King never misses, that's no longer just coping. That's a passive probability hack. As long as the crew treats Soga King as this legendary marksman, the world quietly cooperates. Bullets bend a few extra degrees. Pellets ride micro gusts of wind. Shots thread those "okay, Oda, calm down" impossible gaps. You know those panels where his slingshot trajectory looks like a physics war crime? With the fruit, that's the story asserting itself. Reality, trying to keep the lie true. Here's an interesting thing. The flag burning scene basically becomes a ritual. Usopp declares he'll shoot the world government flag from absurd range, and that claim locks in the outcome. The lie amplifies every environmental factor in his favor. Wind stabilizes. The flag's sway sinks to his aim. The Marines' disbelief actually helps because it heightens the drama for the believers on the tower. It's not that missing is impossible, it's that the narrative weight makes hitting almost mandatory. Oda already framed that shot as a symbolic rejection of the system. The fruit just makes the symbolism a literal combat mechanic. Jump to Dressrosa, and the God Usopp gag stops being just a meme and turns into a feedback loop nightmare for tyrants. The more the Tontata and the slaves believe in God Usopp, the more outrageous his lies can be without snapping. He says, "I'll save you all," and suddenly you get phantom silhouettes on rooftops, echoes of footsteps where no one's running, shadows that look like an army. They're not fully solid, but they're enough to spook guards, knock over a key cart, trigger one of those improbable one-piece chain reactions we all pretend isn't a mess. Sugar is where it gets wild. In canon, his ridiculous face makes her faint. With the Light Fruit, he stacks the deck. He tells everyone he'll become a legendary hero who'll topple Doflamingo, and that mix of fear and desperate hope in the crowd gives the statement weight. Sugar's terror isn't just about a jump scare. She's instinctively reacting to a future that suddenly feels possible. Her fainting becomes the ignition point for a myth. And the liberation blast is even more dramatic than what we got, because the lie is rewriting the battlefield in real time. And to be fair, this slots perfectly into One Piece's whole stories outlive people obsession. Usopp becomes the crew's myth engine. Islands they leave behind stay weirdly safe because pirates have heard rumors that God Usopp watches from every rooftop. His wanted poster is basically a cursed talisman. But I want to emphasize the limitation. If cynicism wins, the fruit chokes. If nobody believes him, his lies are dead weight. That forces him to earn faith the hard way, through actual bravery, not just tall tales. Which raises a nasty little question. If Usopp can weaponize stories, what happens when Chopper's perfect fruit weaponizes compassion and medicine on a divine scale? Because the moment you give a reindeer doctor god-tier biohacking, the whole power system starts to wobble. Chopper's apotheosis, from monster to healing deity. So a lot of people look at Chopper and go, he already has his perfect fruit, right? He's literally the reindeer who became human. To which I say, sure, if we stop at funny mascot with a PhD in cotton candy. But Oda has been quietly building something higher on the food chain. Human fruits that aren't just about species, they're about ideals turning into walking, punching deities. Because as far as tragic backstories go, Chopper's is one of the cleanest thematic loops in the series. He's born wrong for his herd, wrong for humans, branded a monster by both. The blue nose, the rumble ball freakouts, the who would ever want a monster on their crew gag that isn't actually a gag. And then you have Hillaluk dropping that ridiculous, beautiful thesis statement, there is no incurable disease. Chopper's whole dream is to prove that wasn't just a dying man's cope. So if Luffy's body gets retroactively patched into Nika, why can't Chopper's get upgraded into a healing god? Here's the interesting thing. Mythical Zoans already come with concept powers. Marco doesn't just become a bird. He becomes Regeneration Blue Fire. Yamato doesn't just become a wolf, she's ice and guardian deity symbolism. So we pitch Hito Hito no Mi, model, Yakushi Nyorai, the medicine Buddha, or some analogous healing deity Oda could file the serial numbers off of. Suddenly, his monster forms aren't rage glitches, they're embodiments of protective compassion. The ability set basically weaponizes bedside manner. First, diagnostic empathy. He can hear organs and cells, literally listening to a liver screaming from poison, or lungs crackling with gas before symptoms show. Second, an aura-based immune boost, like a passive buff that makes allies shake off infections faster, cuts heal cleaner, anesthesia works safer. Third, the absolutely busted but narratively juicy bit. He can host conditions himself, temporarily suppressing or redirecting toxins, curses, viruses into his own body. Monster Point then stops being this vaguely uncontrollable kaiju mode and turns into Guardian Deity Point. He balloons up not because he's losing it, but because he's taking on the full burden of everyone else's damage. You watch him soak up a plague, black veins crawling over that huge frame, buying the crew 10 crucial minutes while he brews an antidote, or Law sets up a room for surgery. It's still horrifying, but now it's sacrificial, not feral. Run that back through past arcs and the power system starts to look different. Drum Island Chopper with medicine, Buddha powers could literally sense the kingdom-wide malnutrition, the chronic frostbite, the way Wapol's policies are baked into people's bones. Punk Hazard? He feels Caesar's gas before the canisters pop, calls out which organs it's targeting, turns himself into a mobile filter while everyone escapes. And to be fair, if we let him just press cure on any problem, the story collapses. So I want to emphasize the limits. He doesn't conjure miracle drugs. He amplifies natural healing, slows fatal conditions, and creates windows where normal medicine and surgery actually have a chance. Which, by the way, makes him terrifying to the world government's bioweapons division. You build SADs, Smile, ice-only bullets, and then some fuzzy Buddha Tanuki walks in and hard counters your entire R&D budget. We'll come back to that world-building mess later, because next we need to talk about the one straw hat, whose fruit is already god-tier on paper. Robin. How do you perfect a power that basically turns her into a one-woman army and surveillance state? Robin's Hana Hana is already broken. So what's a perfect upgrade? Out of all the straw hats, Robin is the one where the perfect devil fruit conversation kind of collapses on itself. People ask, what's her ideal fruit? To which I say, it's the Hana Hana no Mi, and it's a narrative time bomb Oda has barely detonated. Because as far as raw concept goes, Hana Hana is already insane. On paper, it's she sprouts extra limbs. In practice, it's distributed presence. Robin doesn't just make arms, she projects herself. She can see and hear through distant petals, feel textures, break bones from a blind spot, and stay physically passive the whole time. She's basically a one-woman drone network and assassination squad, running on flowers. Here's an interesting thing, that power is a direct counterspell to her trauma. Robin grows up as the girl the world is hunting, the sole survivor of Ohara, the person who gets betrayed every time she's visible for more than 5 minutes. Her core fear is being seen. Hana Hana flips that. She can stay hidden on the edge of a battlefield while her hands quietly catalogue everything, or she can literally reach into a locked room and grab the secrets without ever being there. The fruit lets her witness history while dodging its firing squad. I want to emphasize how thematically clean that is. Her dream is to uncover the Void Century, the one era the world government is desperate to bury. So what does she get? A fruit that can physically reach into forbidden spaces. The top of the Bridge of Hesitation, the room with the poneglyph, the execution platform in Logetown. The empty throne room we haven't even seen her touch yet. If Luffy's fruit is about freeing joy, Robin's is about dragging buried truth back into the light, fingertip by fingertip. So what's the perfect upgrade that doesn't ruin that balance? Not a beam, not a giant plant kaiju, but a special Paramecia-style awakening. She can bloom memory flowers on objects and locations. When she touches a place, petals sprout and she reads residual will, emotional imprints, vague historical echoes. Not full 4K historical movies, that would be broken even by One Piece standards, but snapshots. The rules would be tight. Old execution platforms might give her a flash of terror and a phrase like Odin's will. A battlefield stone could show silhouettes clashing and a single shouted name. A poneglyph sight might project a symbol, a laugh, or the feeling of betrayal. It's retrocognition with training wheels, evocative, incomplete, and easy for Oda to use as a mystery delivery system without turning Robin into a walking spoiler machine. And suddenly, Robin isn't just the reader of written history. She's the crew's living archive. She can cross-reference the text of the poneglyphs with the emotional history of the oppressed. The government says this was justice, but the stone remembers fear. That's a different kind of evidence. It lets the story attack propaganda not just with facts, but with felt experience. Combat-wise, awakened Hana probably also means full-body clones made of petals that share consciousness. We've already seen giant torsos and wings. Just push it one step further. Now Robin can research on Elbaf, infiltrate Mariajois, and chokeslam a CP0 agent in the same chapter. She becomes narratively omnipresent without breaking the power system, because each clone is still fragile and she's still 1 HP bar. And to be fair, that's exactly why she becomes uniquely terrifying to Imu and the Gorosei. You can erase books, burn islands, bust a cool scholars. How do you fight the woman who can make the world itself remember what you did? If Robin is history's nervous system, then Franky's perfect fruit has to be just as fused with technology and the Thousand Sunny's identity as her upgrade is with memory and truth. Franky's ideal fruit, the shipwright who becomes the ship. If Robin is history's nervous system, then Franky is the part of the brain that saw a diagram of a ship once and said, "Cool, but what if it had a lion face and shot laser beams?" People love to say, "Just give him a metal fruit or a mech fruit," to which I say, you are missing the point of this very loud cyborg man. Because as far as Franky's character goes, his dream is not become a tank. It's build and ride the ultimate ship. His whole life is ships as living dreams. Tom doesn't just build vehicles. He builds the sea train as a promise that the ocean's cruelty can be rewritten. Franky's trauma with the Oro Jackson isn't, "Oh no, bad boat." It's the guilt of having helped create a dream so powerful, the world government decided it was a war crime. Ships to him are wheels you can sail. So if Robin gets a fruit that fuses her with memory, Franky's ideal has to fuse him with that idea of a ship as a person. Enter the ship fruit, Fune no Mi, model, Thousand Sunny. On paper it's a paramecia, but it behaves like this weird Zoan-adjacent system, where the animal form is actually his own creations, with the Sunny as his primary beast mode. Here's an interesting thing. We're not saying the Sunny itself is the fruit. That would be lame, and also terrifying if someone else ate it. I want to emphasize that the fruit lives in Franky's body, not in the hull. Eating it basically turns his cyborg frame into a modular interface. He can sync with the Sunny's systems, slip into a hybrid form where his torso is the Sunny's bow, his arms are soldier docks, his hair is probably a mast, let's be honest, and he literally becomes the ship's will. He's not piloting a vehicle. He's the consciousness riding inside its blueprints. Ability-wise, this is where it gets stupid in the best way. Remote control of the cola engines from anywhere on deck. Kuda burst channeled through his own legs for mid-air course correction. Gaon cannon fired from a transformed chest cavity. Any weapon or gadget he installs into the Sunny automatically has a Franky-compatible mode, so his power scales with his engineering grind, not instead of it. And because the fruit is about shipness as a concept, he can dock with other vehicles, temporarily possess a marine battleship, and make it do the Franky pose against its will. And to be fair, this could easily turn into, Franky is now a permanent ship ghost, which would kind of erase the guy who cries at cola and dances in a Speedo. So the rule is, he can detach at will, walk around as regular cyborg Franky, and the Sunny still retains its own symbolic soul. The Klabauterman, the going merry's tearful goodbye, all of that still matters. He's amplifying the Sunny's spirit, not overwriting it. Now imagine what this does to naval warfare. A Buster Call rolls up, and instead of run, we get Franky full sinks, hybrid Sunny mode, and literally suplexes a battleship. Blackbeard's fleet. Suddenly, every stolen ship is a liability, because one touch lets Franky hijack it. And if that's what one straw hat's perfect fruit does to the Marine's playbook, wait until we talk about the monster that Nami becomes when her devil fruit stops being just weather girl and starts being a literal storm deity. Naval warfare. Rewritten, Franky Sunny versus Buster Calls and Yonko fleets. So suddenly the Buster Call, this big marine panic button that's supposed to be an automatic game over starts to look a lot less like a nuke and a lot more like a boss fight. Because as far as the world government is concerned, the whole point of a buster call is that ships don't fight back. Islands just sit there and die. To which I say, cool plan. Shame about the giant cyborg, who can literally become his own battleship. Run Eni's lobby back with Ship Frankie, and it's a different genre. The cannons fire, the fog clears, and instead of a helpless courthouse, you've got Frankie hybrid syncing with the Sunny. His arms unfold into stacked cannon arrays, shoulder turrets tracking like pacifista eyes, while his back opens to reveal coup de burst thrusters slaved directly to his spine. Every time the marine line volleys, he kicks into reverse broadside, intercepting shells mid-air, slapping some away with mechanical shield fins, and body-checking others into the sea. It stops being destroy the island and becomes, can your artillery out DPS this one lunatic mecha pirate? Here's an interesting thing. This doesn't even work without Nami's weather god fruit from the last section. She's up top, storm halo on, dragging currents and pressure fronts like sliders on a DJ board. She carves literal kill zones into the sea, calm patches that trap marine ships, whirlpools that funnel them into Sunny's firing arcs, while Frankie Sunny pivots for maximum broadside. The 1000 Sunny stops being just a fast ship and becomes a mobile fortress that kind of dances through artillery fire, riding custom-tailored waves and lightning corridors that only Nami can see. Project that forward to Marineford. Imagine Whitebeard's mess of allied captains. But then you get the classic late straw hat entrance. Frankie doesn't just dock with the Sunny, he's jumping between allied ships, slapping his hands on their hulls, and temporarily installing Sunny grade systems. One ship gets emergency coup de boost rams, another gets pop-up shield plating, a third suddenly has cola-fueled side cannons. The ragtag pirate armada turns into this improvised mechanical phalanx, all moving in sync because Nami is puppeteering the tides, and Frankie is literally upgrading morale with every bolt. And when we talk Yonko-level navies, especially Blackbeard's disaster of a power-stacked crew, the asymmetry gets funnier. They're built on overwhelming force and stolen fruits. Frankie is built on reconfiguration, submarine mode to duck under Blackbeard's gravity craters, aerial burst to hop over quake tsunamis, rotating shield arrays that lock together into a Sunny-shaped turtle when Lafitte tries an aerial flank. Their whole system is more power. His is new idea every 10 seconds. The psychological damage here is insane. A ship that fuses with its cyborg builder and starts throwing punches back at the buster call is Mecha Kaizoku theatre. Rank-and-file Marines watch their supposed unstoppable weapon get suplexed by a lion-headed solar galleon, and you can practically hear enlistment numbers drop. I want to emphasize that this is how legends like the Oro Jackson are born. Not just strength, but spectacle. And to be fair, this doesn't delete tension. Cola is finite, repairs take time, and Frankie is still just one guy. He needs Nami's navigation to set up those angles, Usopp's sniper support to pick off weak points, Chopper to keep his overclocked cyborg body from falling apart mid-coup de burst. He's a fleet answer, not a fleet replacement. Which sets up a nice little question. If Frankie becomes the body of the ship, who becomes its soul? Because the answer is Brook, and his perfect fruit turns skeleton musician into something a lot closer to a literal, wandering sea spirit with a soundtrack. Brook's perfect upgrade from soul musician to psychopomp bard. So people like to say, Brook already has his perfect fruit, what more do you want? To which I say, you've been given a literal revive skeleton bard in a world where souls are a hard magic system, and you're satisfied with funny ice ghost grandpa with a sword. Absolutely not. Because as far as untapped concepts go, Yomi Yomi is quietly one of the biggest goldmines Oda's ever dropped. Here's an interesting thing. Brook's whole life is already structured like a psychopomp myth. He dies with his crew, wanders the foggy sea of the Florian Triangle for decades, clinging to a promise to a whale who will never know he kept waiting. His music is not just vibes. It literally soothed a raging island whale, calmed terrified villagers, and on whole cake he casually gaslit Big Mom's homies by flexing a stronger soul. That's not comic relief support. That's a guy whose concerts are borderline necromancy. So instead of giving him a totally new fruit, we just push Yomi Yomi to its logical, awakened extreme. A mythical style psychopomp model. Not a Zoan, but that same conceptual tier. He's no longer just the guy who came back once. He's the guy who can stand at the shoreline between life and death for other people, as long as their will hasn't fully let go. You know how One Piece keeps telling us people's dreams never die? Brook becomes the guy who can hear that. Mechanically, what does that look like? Imagine Brook walking into a battlefield like Marineford 2.0 and, instead of throwing out one-liners, he starts playing a quiet requiem. That song anchors allies whose souls are slipping, literally tying them back to their bodies for one last clash. He can call back a fading soul for 30 seconds so someone can say goodbye, or confess, or drop one crucial bit of information. In a haunted cesspool like Thriller Bark, he can guide the restless dead into actual rest, turning a horror set piece into a mass, musical funeral. And in combat, his existing kit just levels up. The fear and sleep songs become full-blown soul status effects. He can dampen killing intent in a radius, making bloodlust feel like trying to swing through molasses. He can crank courage in a crewmate who's about to break, or subtly scramble devil fruit users whose powers are tightly bound to their soul state. Think Perona, Big Mom, maybe even someone like Blackbeard, whose whole deal is a soul-level mess. You don't just get cut by Brook. You get emotionally patched, rearranged, or shut down mid-swing. I want to emphasize how perfectly this loops back to Laboon. Brook's not just returning as I survived. He's coming back as a walking archive of his crew's unresolved will, their laughs and arguments encoded into his songs. When he plays for Laboon, it's not nostalgia, it's a living requiem that lets the whale feel those echoes one last time. And to be fair, we cap it hard. No mass resurrection, no army of dead pirates. Short windows of communication, brief possessions to lend strength, emotional closure, that's it. Which raises a slightly terrifying question. If Brook is the ferryman, and Zoro is walking around with a death god aura, and Chopper is basically a fuzzy healing deity, what exactly are the Straw Hats turning into as a group? Because we still haven't even handed Jinbe his perfect oceanic fruit, and that's where this whole pirate crew or pantheon thing starts to get actually scary. Jinbe's oceanic destiny, why a fishman needs a sea god fruit. So giving Jinbe a devil fruit should be illegal, right? The man is literally the poster child for touch grass but ocean. Because as far as fishmen go, taking away their ability to swim isn't just a nerf, it's a cultural war crime. To which I say, perfect, let's do it anyway. And then break the rule so hard it stops being a rule. Here's an interesting thing about Jinbe. His entire character is built on being in tune with the sea without needing any magic label on it. Fishman karate is explicitly about striking the water inside and around your opponent. His whole fighting style is basically, what if the ocean punched you personally? And sitting under that is this giant pile of guilt. Arlong's rampage, the Sun Pirate's trauma, Fisher Tiger's death, the way Jinbe tried to play nice with the world government and watched it all go sideways. His dream isn't just fishmen on the surface, it's genuine coexistence. No chains, no slave brands, no segregated ocean. So if we're doing a perfect fruit, it can't just be water logia lol. That's boring, and Oda's too petty in a good way to do something that straightforward. I want to emphasize the fruit has to deepen his bond with the sea, while technically still being a devil fruit. Enter a mythical Zoan or special paramecia, the Umi Umi no Mi, model Ryujin, the sea god fruit. On paper, he's a hammer. In practice, he becomes the ocean's Wi-Fi. The twist is beautifully cursed. Jinbe's physical body in deep water becomes heavy and immobile, like a living poneglyph dropped off the continental shelf. He sinks, he stays, he should be useless. But his consciousness, that spreads. Through currents, through tides, through every droplet touching a sea king's scales. He's not swimming anymore. The sea is wearing Jinbe like a suit. So what does that actually look like in the story? Large-scale current manipulation that makes Fishman karate look like the tutorial. Redirecting tsunamis away from islands the way Fujitora redirects meteors. Calming rampaging sea kings or riling them up into an escort mission from hell. He could literally open safe corridors through the Calm Belt and the most cursed parts of the Grand Line, turning nightmare routes and slave lanes into protected highways for Allied ships. It's the logical endpoint of his existing power system, not a random new idea stapled on. And on the Sunny, this is where it gets disgusting. As helmsman, Jinbe can feel undercurrents, pressure shifts, and weather patterns before Nami's log pose even twitches. He calls out, she plots, and suddenly the Thousand Sunny is basically ungankable at sea. You don't ambush a ship when the ocean itself is the lookout. Culturally, this is the part that breaks the world. A fishman becoming a literal sea god avatar spits in the face of everything the world government tried to do with borders, Holy Land elevators, and slave routes. Fishmen were treated as lesser beings in their own element. Now Jinbe is the element saying no. It reframes oppression as the world trying and failing to put a fence around the tide. And if the Straw Hats now sail with a walking, talking Ryujin anchor, what does that make their ship? A moving sanctuary, a rumour. The boat that appears on the worst routes scoops up chained fishermen and human slaves and vanishes into impossible currents. Which raises the bigger question, if this is what one perfect fruit does to the balance of power, what happens when we finish rearming the entire crew? Balancing the pantheon. Are the Straw Hats too strong now? So at this point, you're probably thinking, cool, we've accidentally built a walking pantheon. Sun God Captain, Sea God Helmsman, Weather Goddess, Death Swordsman, Healing Deer Deity, Story Trickster, Shipwright Prophet of the Thousand Sunny. To which I say, yes, that's kind of the joke, but it's also not as busted as it looks once we zoom out to the actual power mess that is One Piece. Because as far as Oda is concerned, Devil Fruits are not a flat stat boost, they're a narrative multiplier. The series keeps telling us that will, creativity, and role in the story matter more than raw numbers. Buggy is literally the mascot for this idea. Chop Chop should be mid-tier circus material, and yet the man accidentally speedruns Warlord, Yonko, and religious figure. Sugar turns people into toys with a touch, which sounds goofy, and then you realize she can erase entire revolutions from history if the plot lets her cook. The fruits are weird on purpose, so when we hand Luffy Nika, we're not suddenly leaping above the admirals, we're just aligning what he already is. I want to emphasize that even Joy Boy still needs people. Gear 5 doesn't save him from drowning, it doesn't fix his friend's trauma, and it doesn't give him a tax attorney for the bounty on his head. Zoro with a Death God Zone? Cool, now every swing shaves years off his life and every resurrection mode is a gamble. That's not free power, that's a mortgage. Nami's Storm Deity Fruit gives her a regional weather domain, not global climate control. She can bully a battlefield, not the whole red line. Usopp's lies become real. Fruit is completely dependent on people believing him. If no one buys the bit, nothing happens. Imagine him trying to bluff an admiral who's seen everything. Chopper as a healing deity can supercharge medicine, but he still can't cure dead, can't undo the Opope's cost, and can't just delete centuries of disease in one panel. It's all gated by knowledge, time, and his very squishy reindeer body. Now compare that to existing monsters. Admirals casually redraw coastlines with their logias. Akainu and Aokiji fought for 10 days and created a permanent climate scar. The Yonko don't just have power, they have territory, information networks, and political gravity. And Blackbeard is walking around with the Yami and Gura, a dual fruit absurdity that literally breaks the normal system. Our optimized Straw Hats are catching up. They're not leapfrogging that. Here's an interesting thing. All these perfect fruits are built for synergy. Weather plus, sea plus, ship plus stories means the crew becomes this moving myth engine. But that also creates incredibly obvious weak points. You snipe Nami, and suddenly the Storm Sanctuary collapses. You sink or hijack Sunny, and Frankie's prophetic ship fruit turns into a very expensive coffin. Their ceiling goes way up, but the floor is still, oops, we lost the linchpin. And to be fair, once you push a crew this close to godhood, Oda's not going to keep raising the battle power numbers forever. The stakes shift. The Void Century, Imu, ancient weapons, the question of what freedom actually means when you can rewrite weather and stories. Those are problems you can't just punch. That's where Blackbeard's crew comes in as the Dark Mirror Pantheon. Same optimized philosophy, but chaotic, selfish, and exploitative. What does an evil story god look like next to Usopp? What does a corrupted healing deity do to Chopper's ideals? And if you want to see whether this pantheon actually survives contact with the biggest wars in the series, we should probably throw them straight into Marineford and Wano and watch what breaks. Marineford, with a perfect fruit Straw Hat crew. So let's do the thing Oda was too responsible to do and just drop this perfect fruit Straw Hat pantheon straight into Marineford, the arc that already looked like a hacked save file. Because as far as power creep playgrounds go, You literally cannot pick a better testing arena than Whitebeard punching the planet, while 3 Logia admirals and a golden Buddha play tower defense. Here's an interesting thing. We're not doing the usual what if pre-time skip Straw Hats showed up earlier fanfic. That's a different timeline, and also a different level of emotional damage for Luffy's lifespan. We're imagining a world where they've already grown into these fruits, full narrative mastery, and they arrive with one clear shared idea: save Ace and publicly break the world government's illusion of control. Same idiots, same hearts, just with their fruits finally catching up to their dreams. So, opening move. The first shot isn't Whitebeard, it's Nami. Mythical weather deity Zoan Namian Jinbe, Ocean Whisperer, basically press the natural disaster co-op button. You get this precision typhoon funneling around allied ships, a controlled megatide that rips apart the marine defensive ring, but leaves a narrow glassy corridor of calm water. The Moby Dick analogues surfing like it's a theme park ride, while marine grunts are trying to figure out why the forecast suddenly says scriptwriter hatred. Frankie, fused with the Sunny and his perfect warship fruit, literally rocket punches the first line of fortifications, turning those giant gates into confetti. Once it's a full brawl, roles crystallize fast. Zoro's King of Hell Zoan is the vanguard, just carving a path through vice admirals and pacifistas who, to be fair, were already kind of out of date by Sabaody. He's not soloing admirals, but he is the wall that says, "No, Kizaru, you don't get to casually laser Luffy today." Robin's awakened. Hana floods the plaza with silent clones, sprouting eyes on Den Mushi, disarming cannons, and literally handcuffing key officers before they realize the intel leak is the ground itself. Usopp, with his belief-powered story fruit, starts calling out fake divisions of Whitebeard allies, phantom Shichibukai betrayals, and red-haired reinforcements that don't exist, until the Marines believe they do. Command turns into a vague mess of conflicting reports. Meanwhile, Chopper's healing deity form sets up a moving sanctuary zone. He's tagging Whitebeard's crew with regenerative marks, stabilizing Luffy every time he does something brainless, and stretching out everyone's timer just enough that key beats can still happen. Brook's psychopomp music washes over the battlefield, cutting fear and mutiny. Pirates who should break and run instead hold the line because the soundtrack is literally telling their souls, not yet. Now, admirals, I want to emphasize, even with all this, Akainu is still a walking war crime, Kizaru is still light, and Aokiji is still what if climate change had opinions. Direct prolonged fights are suicide. So the Straw Hats don't play that game. Nami and Jinbe keep visibility and footing unstable. Robin keeps isolating admirals from their support. Zoro intercepts killshots. And Luffy's Nika chaos turns the terrain itself into rubbery nonsense anytime an admiral tries to lock things down. The actual Ace rescue becomes this tight, chaotic window. Nika Luffy slingshots reality, Usopp screams a lie about the execution already being cancelled by the Gorosei, and half the plaza hesitates. Nami drops a lightning curtain that blinds the platform for 3 seconds. That's the gap. Chains break, Ace moves, and Whitebeard still chooses to stay and die on his feet, because power never overwrites character in this system. It just gives them louder microphones. Does the casualty list shrink? Probably. Does the symbol of Marineford change? Yeah. It looks less like a clean Marine victory, and more like the day the world saw the system bleed on camera. But the trauma, the age-ending weight of that war, still lands. And if you think that's messy, wait until we drag this optimized crew into Wano, where the setting itself is basically begging to be broken by gods, demons, and story spirits. Wano as mythic endgame, a pantheon of straw hats versus Kaido's empire. Wano is already LARPing as mythic endgame. You've got Oni, dragon emperors, sun deities, underworld swords, a literal floating skull island. So when we drop a fully optimized straw hat pantheon into that, it doesn't feel like fanfic power creep, it feels like taking Oda's vague gods and demons slider and just cranking it until the knob falls off. Because as far as Wano is concerned, Kaido is already framed as a fake god. He's the dragon on the mountaintop, the guy whose whole theology is if you're strong, you're right, if you're weak, you're wrong. Now stack that against Luffy as Nika, Nami as a weather goddess, Zoro as a walking death omen, Jinbe as the sea given opinions. Suddenly, Kaido's not just a tyrant, he's a bad religion. His strength is solitary, hoarded. Their power is shared, distributed across a crew, that literally rewrites what divinity looks like. Here's an interesting thing. Onagashima's raid becomes a coordinated godstorm. Nami and Jinbe don't just sail in, they lay siege. Jinbe turns the surrounding sea into a living moat, currents locking the island in place while Nami stacks thunderheads overhead like artillery. You want a fire festival? Cool, here's a typhoon festival. The Sunny, under Frankie's upgraded fruit, is no longer just a ship, it's a mobile fortress platform. Kuda burst as orbital drop, Gon cannon as divine judgment beam. And while all this is happening, Usopp weaponizes propaganda. His life fruit turns every whispered rumor about the Sun God's army into on-the-spot reality. Phantom Nika silhouettes in the flames, illusory giants marching beside the samurai. The beast pirates don't just lose morale, they lose their grip on what's real. Chopper and Brook quietly flip the emotional script. Chopper, with a healing deity fruit, turns random fodder deaths into recoveries and last stands. The battlefield stops feeling like a meat grinder and becomes a series of miracles that people will actually remember. Brook, as a full psychopomp, lets the dead of Wano brush against the living. Odin's retainers watching over their heirs isn't just subtext anymore. You get literal moments where a dying Yakuza boss smiles because he can see his old captain nodding in approval. And to be fair, that's the kind of thing that would wreck us harder than any giant punch. Zoro's King of Hell Zone is basically Wano-coded from the jump. Enma stops being just a hard-to-control sword and becomes a conduit. The underworld imagery around Ringo, the graveyard hills, the fox spirit, all of that clicks into a lineage of ancient guardians. His fight with King turns into a clash between a fading Sky Race enforcer and a new era Reaper who decides which tyrant bloodlines get to end. Robin's memory bloom awakening is where the world government starts sweating. She touches the execution platforms, Udon's prison stones, the burned castles, and reads the emotional history baked into them. Suddenly the Void Century's hidden rebellions rhyme out loud with Wano's current uprising. And CP0 realizes this isn't just a local coup, it's the return of a very specific, very illegal story. And to which I say, even with all of that, Kaido and Big Mom are still absurd walls. The Straw Hats don't win because their stat blocks are bigger. They win because their shared divinity model outclasses the old Emperor system. Power as a crew project, not a solitary throne. Wano becomes their mythic coming out party. The moment the world sees that this isn't one Joy Boy, it's a whole ecosystem of them. And if this is what they do to a closed country and to Yonko, what happens when that pantheon finally walks into the empty throne room or down into the weapon vaults or onto Laugh Tale itself? Re-ranking the Straw Hats. Whose fruit actually broke the story? So at this point we've basically turned the Sunny into a roaming endgame raid boss. Which sounds fun until you realise we've quietly broken like 4 power systems at once. So let's zoom out and actually re-rank what we've done here. Because as far as narrative health goes, some of these perfect fruits are a little too perfect. Quick speed run of the roster, focusing on the hook, not the stat sheet. Luffy's mythical Zoan keeps him as a freedom engine who turns oppression into slapstick. Zoro's Cursed Blade fruit externalizes his whole become the demon vibe. Nami's Storm Deity fruit makes her the climate god the Grand Line secretly deserves. Usopp's Story fruit weaponizes Liza's reality. Sanji's Transport/Space Step fruit turns chivalry into literal, omnipresent rescue. Chopper's Medical Miracle fruit lets him rewrite what a body even is. Robin's Knowledge-based Clone fruit turns trauma into an information hydra. Frankie's Construction fruit makes every battlefield a shipyard. Brook's Soul Music fruit lets grief and rhythm hit like a Yonko. Jinbe's Ocean Command fruit finally makes him the political face of the sea itself. Now, tears. World-breaking, arc-breaking, flavor-perfect. World-breaking are the ones that don't just win fights, they rewrite the endgame map. Nami's Storm Goddess fruit? She's basically a walking Raftel-level weather weapon. Jinbe commanding the sea itself turns every marine fleet into background props. Usopp turning stories into reality sounds cute until his fake ancient weapon legends stop being fake. Those 3 together start to look less like a pirate crew and more like a soft reboot of nature. Arc-breaking are the fruits that don't topple the world order by themselves, but they absolutely delete specific sagas. Chopper's Body Rewrite fruit trivializes things like Punk Hazard's poison, Queen's plagues, pretty much every virus arc. Sanji's Space Step or Transport Fruit makes Enies Lobby and Whole Cake Island speedruns. Robin's Clone Knowledge Fruit shreds the mystery pacing of Skypia, O'Hara, even Laughtail. Zoro's Cursed Phantom Fruit turns Thriller Bark and Wano Boss fights into horror showcases where the opponents are just trying not to have a mental breakdown. Flavor Perfect are the ones that mostly buff the aesthetic and theme. Frankie's Construction Fruit doesn't shatter the world. It just makes every arc more Frankie. Brook's Soul Music Fruit is terrifying in theory, but mostly enhances his role as emotional thermostat. Luffy's own pick sits weirdly here. It's not more broken than Canon Nika. It's just a different flavor of reality bends because this idiot refuses to give up. And to be fair, that's already busted. Here's an interesting thing. The most surprising world breakers are the support fruits. People hear Usopp, but his lies are real now, and go, cute gag. To which I say, mate, that's literally a budget version of Imu's propaganda machine, except in one guy's brain. Same with Nami. A navigator who can nudge the weather is handy. A navigator who is the weather makes things like the Buster Call at Enies Lobby or Akainu's Magma just bad scheduling. But Oda-style limitations and character flaws are doing a lot of silent damage control here. Nami's fruit needs prep, intel, and emotional stability, 3 things she does not always have. Usopp's story fruit is only as strong as his conviction, and this is a man who will panic quit mid-sentence. Jinbe's Sea Command still dies the moment you put him in a bathtub or a desert. It's the same trick as Nika. Luffy is, on paper, a Toon Force god, but he's also an exhausted rubber brain who forgets to eat. I want to emphasize then that the strongest fruit in this whole mess isn't the most explosive. It's the one that accelerates a Straw Hat's personal arc so fast it starts to feel dangerous, like we've skipped all the messy growth and gone straight to the final form. And in the next part, we need to talk about which of these perfect fruits actually crosses that line. The Straw Hat, timeline, corrupted, how one fruit choice breaks entire arcs. So let's actually stress test that danger by corrupting the timeline a bit, because if these fruits are too perfect, the story should start snapping in really uncomfortable places, right? Cool, let's break Alabasta first. Give Nami a full weather deity mythical Zoan before they hit the desert. Crocodile's entire drought plan? She walks outside, does a divine humidity adjustment, and it literally rains on Baroque Works parade. No heroic run across the sands, no dance powder paranoia, no slow realization that the kingdom is being strangled. It's fixed in an afternoon, and to be fair, that sounds amazing for Vivi, but terrible for pacing. Here's an interesting thing though, the second Nami casually undoes a years-long ecological catastrophe, she stops being clever navigator and becomes a strategic resource. Vegapunk, the Gorosei, every weather-obsessed scientist is suddenly going, wait, that's a portable climate weapon. Alabasta doesn't end with a quiet farewell. It ends with CP agents marking Nami as a top priority capture. Jump to Enies Lobby and give Usopp the storytelling or illusion god fruit we talked about. Instead of a physical siege where the going merry limps in like a miracle, the entire island becomes a psychological horror show. Usopp can make every lie he's ever told manifest. Armies of giants, phantom buster calls, an endless Sojourn brigade marching on the Tower of Justice. The Marines don't know what's real. Spandam loses his mind on day 1, and Robin's I want to live moment shifts from being about accepting help in the face of overwhelming force to realizing that the Straw Hats have already out-narrated the world government. Did they win because they were strong, or because the system let one guy rewrite perception itself? People like to say that sounds hype, to which I say yes, and also you just turned Usopp into a soft power Imu. Now corrupt Marineford. Imagine Chopper with a healing deity fruit, or Brook with a soul-adjacent upgrade that can recall wandering spirits. Suddenly, casualties plummet. Whitebeard's forces don't get ground down the same way. Ace's execution platform turns into a revolving door of, no actually, he's still alive. And even random Marines aren't dying in droves. Sengoku and Garp watch this tiny reindeer, or skeleton, casually undo the cost of war. And, because as far as strategic threats go, that's worse than a Yonko. You can't have an age of deterrence through Buster Call if one Straw Hat is functionally anti-death. Wano gets even weirder. Give Zoro a full Curse Blade, mythical Zoan that ties into some underworld deity, or crank Sanji up with a fruit that makes him a walking solar forge brushing against Lunarian law. Suddenly their power isn't just swordsman or cook, it's prophecy adjacent. Ancient inscriptions about a flaming guardian. That might be Sanji now. Vague legends of a three-soul warrior. Zoro accidentally fits the job description. The Joy Boy narrative stops orbiting Luffy and starts fracturing into multiple potential saviors, which is a cool idea until every prophecy scene becomes a guessing game and the emotional through line turns into a mess. I want to emphasize that this is the real tightrope. The closer a fruit gets to a perfect thematic fit, the more it risks derailing that underdog versus God's tension Oda has been nursing for decades. And the scary question we have to ask next is, which specific Straw Hat fruit crosses that line so hard it starts rewriting the endgame itself? The Oda Rulebook. What our picks reveal about how fruits actually get chosen. So let's actually answer the scary question. If a fruit can rewrite the endgame, what does that say about how Oda picks these things in the first place? Because as far as internet discourse goes, people talk about devil fruits like a gacha system, but Oda treats them more like cursed personality quizzes that follow you for the rest of your life. Look at the big 3 case studies we've been orbiting. Luffy and Nika isn't just rubber, but secretly god tier. It's destiny welded onto personality. A boy who refuses to sit still gets the fruit that literally weaponizes joy. Law and the Ope Ope isn't just surgery powers. It's a tragic kid who watched everyone die, forced into being the surgeon of fate who can't stop cutting people's lives apart. Robin and the Hana Hana? Isolation turned into omniscience. The girl who had to hide everywhere can now be everywhere. And it's horrifying. These are the templates we used when we handed our hypothetical fruits to the rest of the crew. From that, we can actually pull a kind of Oda rulebook. Rule 1. The fruit has to exaggerate a core insecurity. Luffy's fear of being powerless to save people becomes this insane liberation warrior pressure. With our straw hats, Nami's storm deity Zoan doesn't just make her cool and shiny, it dials up her terror of losing control of the weather that destroyed her home. Usopp's story style fruit makes his lies real, sure, but it also weaponizes his imposter syndrome. If every tall tale manifests, suddenly he can't hide behind just kidding anymore. Rule 2. The fruit needs to visually embody the dream. Luffy's cartoon god of freedom, Law's operating theatre bubbles, Robin's blooming bookshelves of limbs. We leaned into that with Chopper's hypothetical healing deity Zoan. The silhouette alone screams, world's greatest doctor, and to be fair, also world's saddest potential martyr. Frankie's material warping power turns Ship of Dreams into a walking, transforming thesis on what a ship can even be. Rule 3. There has to be at least one cruel irony baked in. Here's an interesting thing. Ope Ope can grant immortality, but only by sacrificing the user. That's not a side note, that's the point. A Brook soul music upgrade does the same trick. The guy who's terrified of being forgotten gets a fruit that lets him literally bind souls to songs, while hinting that one day he might have to play the last concert that costs him his own. Rule 4. The fruit must enable a late-game awakening twist. Nika's true nature, Law's awakening, Robin's demonic giant form. All of them turn the power into a new genre of horror. Nami awakening weather itself as a semi-sentient system. Chopper awakening biology so he can rewrite species. That's the kind of thing that breaks the world building open, not just adds new punches. Now, what about random fruits that look like they break the rules? People love to point at Buggy. He's a clown who explodes into Lego pieces. Surely that's just comedy, right? To which I say, look at the backstory and the future potential. A coward terrified of dying gets the one power that makes him basically unkillable, then stumbles into a symbol of how fractured the pirate era is. His split body mirrors a world chopped into pieces, and the joke is that the universe keeps promoting him for it. I want to emphasize how support roles follow a different sub-rule. Their fruits expand systems instead of damage numbers. Nami touches the weather system, Chopper the biology system, Frankie the materials and technology system, Brook the soul system. That's why their awakenings feel like new textbooks the story has to deal with. And if your perfect straw hat fruit doesn't make you a little uncomfortable about how much extra suffering it implies, it's probably not Oda accurate. Because the whole idea with these picks is that they don't just make the crew cooler, they crank up the cost of their dreams. The real question is, which of those costs are we actually willing to watch play out on screen? The devil's trade-off. what each straw hat would secretly lose. So here's the uncomfortable part of the thought experiment. Every one of these perfect straw hat fruits is basically a devil's contract written in Oda font. You're not just getting a cool new power system install, you're signing away something human, because as far as One Piece is concerned, the sea always sends you an invoice. Here's an interesting thing. Devil fruits in the story almost never come alone. Luffy gets freedom as cartoon god, loses the ability to swim. Law gets surgical omnipotence. His life becomes collateral. Robin gets infinite hands, and those hands are literally tied to genocide. So when we hand Nami a mythical zone that makes her a storm goddess, we're not just giving her better navigation. We're deleting the option to ever be just a thief again. She stops being the girl who can slip through a crowd. She becomes a walking weather event. Every village that floods? People start whispering her name. That's power, but it's also permanent responsibility cosplay she can't take off. Chopper's hypothetical healing deity fruit looks wholesome on paper. Cute reindeer becomes literal medical miracle. What's not to love? To which I say, have you met this series? The second Chopper crosses from monster doctor to island-saving god. He stops being a friend and starts being a resource. The drum dream of a doctor who can cure anything twists into a world that refuses to let him rest, or fail, or admit he doesn't know. Patients don't thank him. They worship him or burn him when he can't fix the unfixable. He wanted acceptance as a person, and the fruit quietly swaps that for reverence and fear. Usopp's conceptual story fruit might be the most dangerous. Every lie becomes real. Every tall tale manifests. Sounds perfect for the guy whose whole thing is bluffing his way into bravery, right? And to be fair, it's hilarious for about 5 minutes. Then you realize his coping mechanism is now a WMD. The gap between cowardice and courage that he's supposed to cross, step by painful step, just gets paved over. Why learn to be brave when you can just narrate a braver version of yourself into existence? That's the growth problem. A fruit that grants the end state of your character arc too cleanly kind of short-circuits the story. Oda loves dangling godhood in front of people and then asking, okay, but what does the sea do to you now? Look at Blackbeard. Yami Yami and Gura Gura are terrifying not because of raw damage numbers, but because they weaponize vulnerability and consequence. One fruit amplifies pain, the other turns every mistake into an earthquake. He's basically a walking reminder that the world punishes arrogance in surround sound. I want to emphasize, the more divine the fruit we give a straw hat, the more the narrative has to test their humanity. If Brook got a music deity, Zoan, that could literally command souls, how long before his concerts stop being concerts and start being mass consent issues? If Frankie became a living warship via some absurd shipwright paramecia, does he accidentally become the thing he hates? An instrument of state violence? So here's the real question. If you laid out the full cost, would any of them actually say yes? Or is the refusal to take the shortcut exactly why this crew is fit to carry the Pirate King in the first place? And what happens when we finally meet a crew that doesn't refuse it? Crew chemistry on steroids. How these fruits mutate straw hat team-ups. And this is where it gets stupid in the best possible way. Because once you hand the straw hats all these perfect fruits, the real upgrade isn't solo power levels. It's that the crew fight becomes an actual raid boss choreography video directed by a gremlin. Think about the classic monster trio. Pre-fruit, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji is just 3 flavors of blunt force trauma. Post-fruit, Luffy's Nika weirdness plus Zoro's mythical curse zone plus Sanji's flame or wind deity fruit turns them into a physics violation committee. Luffy rubberizes the battlefield. Zoro carves dimensional seams into it. Sanji kicks those seams into tornadoes. You get something like Gomu Gomu no Demon Tempest. Luffy slingshots Zoro through a Sanji-made updraft. Zoro's slashes ride the wind as homing blades that bend around allies because the rubber ground redirects shockwaves. It sounds like a gag, to which I say yes, and that's exactly why it works. Nami Usopp is where the system goes from cool to Oda, are you okay? If Nami has a storm goddess mythical zone, and Usopp has a story or lie-based paramecia, they literally weaponize narrative. Picture Weathertail, Thousand-Year Squall. Usopp declares a legendary storm that never existed. His fruit makes the concept real, but flimsy. Nami then anchors that fake storm with her divine weather control turning a half-baked illusion into a localized cataclysm. Eni's lobby-style combo, but now the sky itself is gaslit. Chopper Robin as support becomes disgusting in a very medical ethics way. Give Chopper a healing zone or disease-editing fruit, and Robin a memory or clone-based power, and suddenly you have Trauma Garden. Chopper creates a field where wounds and toxins are suspended instead of removed. Robin prints memory construct doubles of the crew into that field, siphoning damage and even psychological shock into expendable copies. Someone tries to break Sanji by replaying his Germa childhood. Robin literally drags that memory into a clone and lets it shatter instead. I want to emphasize how on-brand it is that emotional first aid becomes a battlefield mechanic. And to be fair, once you start pairing these fruits, you accidentally promote people. Nami's weather deity fruit plus her navigator brain makes her the natural battlefield commander. She's literally reading barometric pressure and enemy formations in the same glance. Robin with a memory or history fruit becomes the intel chief, live editing what the enemy thinks just happened. Usopp, whose lies now rewrite reality, turns into the morale and misinformation captain. Luffy is still the sun at the center, but the orbit tightens. He calls the destination, they run the war room. Here's an interesting thing. Oda loves the gag into god tier combo arc. Perona's ghosts, Mr. Two's faces, even Kinnaman's buttfire are jokes until someone stacks them. With this crew, Brook's soul music plus Nami's storm illusions becomes Requiem Regatta, a haunting concert that makes enemies see the wrong ship, the wrong sea, the wrong death. Frankie's hypothetical ship Paramecia plus Chopper's healing zone gives us Emergency Dry Dock, where the Sunny itself sprouts surgical bays mid-fight. Because as far as power fantasies go, the fun version isn't each straw hat soloing an admiral. It's the whole crew becoming this over-synchronized chaos engine where every dumb idea is secretly tech. And we haven't even asked the really cursed question yet. What happens when a crew like Blackbeard's, built for exploitation instead of trust, tries to copy that same synergy? Against the grain, why some straw hats are better off staying human. So here's the rude awakening for the power scaling part of our brains. Some straw hats should never touch a devil fruit. Not wrong fruit, not bad synergy. Literally nothing. Because as far as the story's wiring goes, giving them powers would be like slapping a jet engine on the going merry. Impressive, yes. Spiritually illegal, also yes. The obvious sacrificial lamb here is Zoro. People love to give him some cool, mythical zone or a sword Paramecia that lets him turn into a katana, to which I say, you're missing the point of the guy whose entire brand is I cut God with push-ups and alcoholism. Zoro is the Shanks/Garp/Mihawk pipeline. No fruit, no nonsense. Just the idea that if you grind hard enough, you can stand next to sun gods and reality warpers with nothing but steel and spite. Here's an interesting thing. Oda keeps sprinkling these fruitless monsters at the very top of the food chain. Shanks terrifies admirals with presents. Garp is literally hurling battleships like dodgeballs. Mihawk slices tsunamis in half because he's bored. That's not an accident. That's a design note. The system says, yes, fruits are broken, but the world quietly replies, they're optional. Zoro is the Straw Hat's in-house version of that statement. And to be fair, it's not just a power thing, it's visual language. Zoro's fighting style is pure, almost stubbornly so. 3 swords, 1 bandana, no particle effects. Cool. You start giving him dragon scales or shadow clones or whatever, and suddenly Asura stops feeling like this weird, half-explained demon aura and starts feeling like a menu option. The whole appeal of Asura is that it's this vague mess of cursed swords, haki, and willpower that we can't quite systematize. You slap a devil fruit on top and everyone just goes, oh, it's that. Boring. Sanji's in the same danger zone. His entire character is, I only use my legs, and I refuse to use my hands in combat because they're for cooking. It's a dumb, beautiful, extremely one-piece idea. You give him, say, a fire fruit or a wind fruit, and suddenly Diable Jambe isn't this self-made ignition trick born from training in Hell's Kitchen. It's a UI element. The Germa raid suit already flirted with overwriting his silhouette. A fruit would finish the job. I want to emphasize, we get why fans do this. We like symmetry. If Luffy is Nika and Blackbeard is a walking fruit museum, then shouldn't every Straw Hat get their own myth tier upgrade? But Oda keeps some top tiers fruitless specifically to preserve contrast. The system needs baselines. It needs people whose ceiling is human but maxed out, so the powers feel like spice instead of the entire meal. So the real perfect crew might be this weird hybrid. Support roles with fruits that amplify their jobs: navigator, doctor, musician, shipwright, while a couple of frontliners stay brutally, defiantly human. Because if everyone is a god, then no one is. The story needs mortals to prove the sun god wasn't a fluke, which then raises the uncomfortable question. If we're protecting Zoro and Sanji's humanity, who actually gets to eat the truly busted fruits? Blackbeard, Vegapunk, and the endgame fruit arms race. So if the truly busted fruits aren't going to Zoro or Sanji, where do they go? They walk straight into the worst possible timeline, the endgame fruit arms race between Blackbeard, Vegapunk, and one very overqualified rubber band boy. Because as far as Devil Fruit hoarding goes, Blackbeard is already playing New Game Plus. He's the guy who looked at one body, one fruit and said, to which I say, what if my stomach is a shared Dropbox folder? Meanwhile, Vegapunk is on egghead speed running the entire system, trying to turn every myth, lineage factor, and failed smile into a coherent science project. Now imagine our straw hats cruising around with a curated set of god-tier, thematically perfect fruits. That doesn't just crash into their agendas, it deletes their PowerPoint files. Here's an interesting thing. A crew like that instantly scrambles Blackbeard's target list. He's not just vaguely going after strong fruits anymore, he's theory crafting. Nami with a weather deity zone that hard counters his darkness? That becomes priority assassination, not acquisition, because you don't want the walking storm firewall on your own ship. Usopp with a conceptual stories become real paramecia? You probably don't even risk getting within lying distance. Meanwhile, something like a healing or time-bending medical fruit on Chopper is pure Blackbeard bait, the kind of support power you steal and then shove onto Doc Q so the horse stops dying every 5 minutes. And to be fair, Blackbeard is already framed as the anti-Luffy, the guy who collects powers instead of friends. A straw hat lineup, where every fruit is emotionally and thematically dialed in, is Oda basically saying, this is what your dream looks like, when you let the story pick the fruit instead of your greed. Vegapunk, on the other hand, would lose his gigantic mind in a completely different way. One ship accidentally concentrating multiple mythic or system-defining fruits is like the universe handing him a lab on tour. The Vivre cards already talk about conceptual paramecia like Sugar's Hobby, and mythical zoans that come with built-in myth powers, like Marco's Flames or Yamato's Ice. If Nami, Brook, and Chopper are all walking around as weather, music, and life/death deities that turbocharges his devil fruits are people's wishes theory overnight, you can almost see him running around yelling, I want to emphasize this, you idiots are literally walking thesis statements. And the world government is not blind. Databooks and SBS blurbs already hint at fruit lineages, artificial knockoffs, and failed experiments. A perfect navigation fruit that manipulates climate? That's basically a military weather weapon they've been trying to synthesize since Smiles. A dream or story-based paramecia is propaganda tech. These perfect matches would quietly slide onto CP0 watch lists the second they surface. Suddenly the final war stops, being just Marines versus pirates, and turns into a referendum on human evolution. How far are we allowed to push biology when dreams rewrite your DNA? Is Vegapunk's mass production approach more dangerous than Blackbeard's hoarding? Are the Straw Hats hypocrites if they keep reality-breaking fruits while preaching freedom? And the real endgame question stops being who wins the fight and becomes who gets to decide what the next generation of fruits and the next generation of dreamers actually look like? Because the answer to that might already be growing in a lab we haven't seen yet. From cover stories to canon, obscure fruits that deserve a straw hat. And if the next generation of fruits is being decided in a lab we haven't seen yet, the even funnier part is that Oda has already been beta testing them in places most of us skipped. The real devil fruit stock market isn't Marineford, it's the cover stories and data books you swipe past at 2 times speed. Because as far as obscure fruits go, we've got some absolute chaos sitting in the margins. Take the Atsu no Mi from Donachino in that random Ice Hunter filler arc. A heat fruit that sounds mid until you realize it literally melts warships and warps steel. Or the Ami no Mi from that cover story Glutton Wapol. A net fruit that lets you absorb and remix materials like a budget version of the Pacifista factory. Easy to overlook, easy to clown on, and yet these are basically prototype versions of endgame industrial powers. Here's an interesting thing. If you slap the Ami Ami onto Frankie, it stops being a gag and becomes horror. This man already weaponized cola. Give him a fruit that lets him swallow battleship scrap, Vegapunk tech, and Seastone shrapnel, then rebuild his body overnight. And suddenly, Thousand Sunny is a walking arms race. Everyone says, that's broken, to which I say, yes, that's the point. You're watching a shonen about pirate wish fulfillment. Frankie turns into a one-man R&D department, and the tone shifts from goofy cyborg to, what if Kaido was also an engineer? Usopp is where the really cursed potential lives. Databooks and SBS answers keep flirting with conceptual paramecia, fruits that embody ideas like hobby, luck, or fear. Now imagine an obscure side material only Lai fruit that makes any story he tells temporarily real within a certain range. At first it's comedy. He yells about 10,000 fishmen, and they pop into existence as weak illusions. But give that to a chronic coward with a sniper's patience and it becomes psychological warfare. He can project fake admirals, fake Buster Calls, fake Kaidos, and you never know which nightmare is the real one. Oda loves weaponizing cowardice. Usopp, with a story-based fruit, is basically Perona plus sugar plus a D&D dungeon master. And I want to emphasize, Oda's done this park it in the margins first trick a lot. Mantra before observation. Phoenix flames in a movie before mythical zone regeneration was fully codified. He'll toss a wild idea into a cover story, let it sit for a decade, then quietly upgrade it to canon and act like it was always part of the system. So when we see underused navigation or dream-adjacent fruits in side material, a weather deity Zoan that passively bends currents, or a luck-based paramecia that nudges probability, you can absolutely imagine Nami or Chopper wearing those as alternate perfects. Nami as a literal storm goddess turns her from smart support into a walking climate revolution. Chopper, with a medical concept fruit that rewrites body rules, makes the Ope look like a very precise scalpel next to his reality eraser. And to be fair, this is why rereading cover stories and SBS answers starts to feel like walking through a devil fruit graveyard. It's just rows of discarded prototypes quietly whispering, this could have been a straw hat power-up. The main story hasn't cashed them in yet. The real question is, which one of those throwaway fruits is secretly the next Nika level retcon waiting for an editor to say, yeah, do it? Because once you start treating the margins as a spoiler minefield, you have to ask something uncomfortable. If Oda can upgrade anything, how safe are the fruits we already think we understand? Dreams, trauma, and godhood. Why these matches feel uncomfortably right. So if no fruit is actually safe, then perfect stops meaning strongest and starts meaning most likely to ruin this character's emotional stability on camera. Which, to be fair, is kind of Oda's favourite hobby. Because as far as our Straw Hat lineup goes, every hypothetical fruit we picked is basically a guided missile aimed straight at a core wound. Nami with a storm goddess, mythical Zoan, isn't just haha weather queen. This is a former slave whose entire life was dictated by a tattoo and a map, suddenly holding the same kind of power Arlong used to control her island, the sky itself. Every time she calls down a storm on some tyrant, she's also reliving being the girl who couldn't stop one. Chopper's perfect medical god fruit? On paper, it's the dream. A doctor who can literally rewrite bodies, out-oping law in the surgery flex department. But here's an interesting thing. This is the reindeer who already believes he's a monster when he pushes his power too far. Give him a conceptual paramecia that lets him cure anything by selectively breaking people down first, and suddenly every operation is a public referendum on whether he's a healer or a horror story. Monster Point stops being a one-off rampage and becomes the question he has to ask himself every arc. Usopp is where it gets actually mean. A fruit that makes stories real sounds fun until you remember his whole personality is a mess built on lies, cowardice, and this quiet, festering belief that he's the weak link. Imagine he panics, blurts out some wild lie about an invincible warrior of the sea showing up to save them. And the fruit makes it him, in front of everyone. No backing out, no, that was just a joke, just his own myth dragging him onto the battlefield. The power forces him to live inside the exact expectations he's been running from. And to be fair, That's exactly how Oda already treats devil fruits. The best ones don't solve problems. They crank the dial on existing pain. Robin's Hana Hana turned her into a human surveillance system and a torture victim before it ever made her a cool battlefield controller. Law's Ope Opa is the ultimate surgeon's tool, stapled to the trauma of Flavance Corazon and that immortality operation hanging over his head like a narrative guillotine. I want to emphasize how often awakenings or big power-ups arrive, right after somebody breaks down. Luffy's Gear 5th is literally a joy god unlocked by dying for his friends. Robin's Demonio Fleur comes only after she accepts being a devil if it means protecting her family. These fruits don't show up at the end of a training montage. They show up when someone ugly cries about their past. So when we say perfect fruit, we're not min-maxing a gacha account. We're asking, which power would make this character's life objectively harder, while also generating the exact kind of messy, cathartic, tear-jerking meltdown Oda loves to storyboard? If it makes you go, wow, I never want Nami to live through that, but Oda absolutely would make her, that's the uncomfortable sweet spot. And if that's our metric, some of these matches stop feeling like fanfic and start feeling like spoilers for a version of One Piece we barely avoided. The question is, how far can we push that alignment before it breaks the crew we actually know? Would Oda ever do this? Testing our picks against canon, foreshadowing. So let's sanity check this before we start acting like we've leaked Oda's private storyboard. Because as far as the actual manga is concerned, Devil Fruits for the Straw Hats are this weird mix of running gag, dramatic temptation, and giant do not touch sign taped to Zoro's swords. Here's an interesting thing. Oda keeps dangling fruits around them. Luffy casually offers Nami a fruit in Orangetown. Chopper is literally a walking PSA about side effects. Sanji gets the swim fruit joke in Film Z, and that SBS bit where Oda says, yeah, if Sanji ever ate a fruit, it'd be something that lets him swim through the air. That lines up suspiciously well with any air mobility fruit we gave him. It's a joke, but it's also a prototype power system note scribbled in the margin. Oda's also been pretty clear in SBS that he doesn't want the whole crew to be fruit enjoyers. He's talked about liking the balance of swimmers and non-swimmers, and he's openly worried about power creep. And to be fair, this is the guy who made the Ope Ope and Hobby Hobby fruits and then went, okay, I'm going to lock these behind massive narrative cost. So when we throw a mythical Zoan at, say, Nami and turn her into a storm goddess, we're fighting his stated fear that the series just becomes Marvel Grand Line Edition. That said, some of our picks almost feel too compatible. A weather or sky deity Zoan for Nami? Canon already treats her like a proto-god. She reads the climate like observation haki, bullies Zeus, and literally weaponizes the New World's insanity. You could drop a Raijin-type fruit on her and it would read less like a twist and more like the world finally catching up to her job description. Usopp with a stories become real, conceptual paramecia is another one that plugs straight into existing wiring. Oda has SBS joke that Usopp is the straw hat who lies first, and then reality politely rearranges itself later. We have canon fruits like Sugar's Hobby Hobby and Perona's Horo Horo that already prove abstract idea as power is on the table. Give Usopp a telltale fruit and suddenly every gag panel about his lies becomes retroactive destiny, Nika style. On the other hand, some matches are probably too wild even by One Piece standards. A chopper fruit that casually out-Ope's lore and lets him rewrite biology on a global scale. That starts breaking the medical tension Oda loves. A full reality editing fruit on Robin turns every Poneglyph mystery into a UI option. At that point, the Void Century is a software patch. And I want to emphasize, Oda loves retroactive destiny, but he also loves pretending he doesn't. Nika is the poster child. The rubber fruit was a dumb gag until suddenly it wasn't. Could he do that with a late-game Zoro or Sanji fruit? Maybe, but he's also running out of runway. We're in the final saga, not the add 3 more magic systems saga. Narratively, a mid-story fruit is expensive. Zoro, or Sanji, eating one now demands a Marineford-level crisis, a permanent trade-off, and at least one heartbreaking callback to all the times they bragged about fighting with just their bodies. Done right, it's peak drama. Done wrong, it's the Germa raid suit again, a cool toy stapled on top of an already complete character. So our list is less prophecy and more stress test. By pushing these fruits against canon foreshadowing, we get a clearer picture of what Oda's actually protecting. The idea that most of the crew's power system is just human potential turned up to 11. The fun question is, if he ever does break that rule, which Straw Hat can survive it without breaking the story too? /